I hear sniffling.
What's going on?
Someone going to start?
I have no idea.
Ken, I thought you were starting.
I guess I'm starting now.
I guess we're 50 seconds into a live and we didn't know we all missed it.
Everybody's
Sorry, folks. I'm Terry Battisti with the Big Bass Podcast.
It's
the
not
podcast where size matters.
This is not my podcast.
Ken, we're live.
I have no idea what's going on here, folks. But hey, everybody, welcome to the Big Bass Podcast, a fishing show where size matters. My name is Ken Duke.
I'm Byron Velvick. Hey.
And that's Byron Velvick and Terry Battisti, my host. And I think everybody recognized the music from Terry Battisti's high school days. That was his band.
Was that
and I have no idea what that was about, but that was pretty screwy.
Yeah, it was way screwy.
Our apologies for that. That was actually probably my fault, and I blame myself. But anyway, it doesn't matter.
I don't know.
We've got a great show
Nathan
for you tonight.
Anything.
I can't blame Nathan for that. That was I think I know what I screwed up on that deal. But forget about that. Forget about the weird intro. Forget about the rap music. Forget about all that stuff. This is all going to be fixed and made better immediately because of our fabulous guest, our friend Byron Velvick. We had Byron on a couple months ago, and we dug deep into his swim bait knowledge. But one of the reasons we love to do the live show is it's an opportunity for you folks watching, listening, well, at least the folks watching on YouTube anyway, and maybe through some of the other social media platforms, to jump in and have this conversation with Byron as well. So please, by all means, jump in and let's all talk to Byron. Yeah. Byron, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Ken. Was there music playing that I didn't hear? Was there some kind of a rap thing happening? Because I missed all that. What was going down over there?
I think what actually happened there, and we haven't given Terry even a chance to speak yet, but what was actually going down was we accidentally tapped into the music that Battisti plays in his office 24/7.
Hey. That is wrong.
Ice Cube, NWA, Run DMC. Is that
Stiff Little Fingers?
Hill Gang, Insane Clown
TSOL, Black Flag.
Okay.
I have no idea what any of that is.
It's a retro music podcast, not a fishing podcast.
That is so true. You know, the Big Bass Podcast, we're more about the big gangsta rap podcast. We're changing the name. But man, thank you, Byron, for coming back and doing a live show with us, because your previous appearance was so popular. I had so many folks tuning in. We know they want to have a chance to have some discourse with you. But first, one of the last things I ended your last appearance with us on was I was saying, man, why aren't you doing a podcast? Because you are so good at this, much better than Terry and myself. What progress has been made to get the Byron podcast going?
Ken, you don't have to look any farther than Nathan, your engineer and sound guru, media guru, who will say that Byron guy has no idea how to even handle an iPad, iPod, a computer. So unless I steal Nathan away from you and he and I sit here in San Antonio and we do this whole podcast together, I am all thumbs and no fingers when it comes to all this tech stuff. So I think a podcast is way off in my another lifetime maybe, but definitely not this life.
I tell you, man, I have zero technical skills. I joke that I have the technical skills of the Amish.
You have Nathan. You have Nathan.
Well, that's exactly right. But you have a teenage daughter, and I'm pretty sure that any teenage girl in America is tech savvy and can do this podcast, YouTube stuff very, very well. Yeah. So I don't know if you even have a good excuse. And you don't have to pay her.
And I don't have to pay. That's true. It's free labor. It's child labor, but it's free labor. I'll just have to break any child labor laws in that one. But yes, I could actually recruit my daughter to help me with this podcast, and she may go for that.
She was actually the one who was a big part of getting you on the show last time and getting over some of those technical hurdles.
Yeah, it was her computer we had to use. Remember, we had to use her school computer. Like I had to borrow this iPad because, as you guys told me, my brand new, supposedly nice computer has no microphone that works or
It-
barely
didn't
works.
she-
Like I was in a submarine talking to you guys through a tin can with a wire.
Didn't she get in trouble the next day for streaming on her work or her school computer?
Yeah. That one, what they thought about that when they see all the time she put in at night streaming on a school computer.
Wow, I had no
man.
idea, but sorry about that. Sorry to your daughter on that
What's
deal.
up, Derek?
But
She's
You know-
got in trouble for a lot worse, unfortunately.
Uh-oh.
I love your name for the show. You're not Byron Velvick in your little ID there. You're that swim bait guy. Last time I think you identified yourself as swim bait OG.
The OG.
Mhm.
The OG, yeah. And obviously a lot of your reputation is based upon your skills and tremendous tournament record, which a lot of that was done on swim baits.
Yeah.
Is that an identity you like? A lot of pro anglers want to be thought of as extremely versatile and things like that. But I've always thought there was power in being identified with something very specific, like Zell Rowland in the Pop-Off,
Yes.
or Denny Brower in a black and blue jig.
Exactly. You're not really, you don't want to just be known as just an all around, yeah, you're a great fisherman. You're real versatile. We're all versatile. I've won tournaments on Carolina rigs. I've won tournaments, on a lot of other things, but I love the moniker because I pioneered it. I feel blessed that I was fortunate, 20 years ago to pioneer something, which has really become a hot rage now. And
It wasn't 20 years ago, Byron. It was 30 years ago.
hey.
Bad news, my
20,
friend. Bad
20,
news.
15 years ago. My daughter, 11, you're right, Terry. It's probably 30 plus years ago. It is, isn't it?
Yeah, because didn't you win that first? Was it a Pedro or a Shasta event like in the mid 90s?
Yeah, it was the mid 90s actually.
Yeah. Dude,
Oh
we're in
my
the mid 20s.
So old.
Yeah,
Yikes.
I know.
It was the mid 90s, and so it's crazy that you're talking to these kids who weren't born yet about throwing a swim bait. So I just did. I did 2 club meetings here in Bernie. I went to 2 of the. It was so cool to do the Bass Club meetings, the Bass Club Bernie Bass Club meetings, and these kids and kind of trying to give them the history of swim baits from back. It's like, talking about when cell phones didn't exist, or them having, the idea of what the hell's a fax machine or what's a CD, and you're talking about the world before swim baits. It's hard for them to imagine a time when a super spook was so big that we couldn't believe they would eat that. It's just crazy.
It was huge.
We all lived in a world where we thought fish weren't eating anything bigger than 3 or 4 inches. And if it was 5-6 inches, it was a saltwater lure that you were tricking them with. So it's neat to be a pioneer of that. And to your point, I like that I have that identity, I suppose.
I'm going to make a bold statement and say that if not for Byron Velvick, I think the role of big swim baits, not just in tournament fishing, but in average angler fishing as well, but especially tournament fishing, I think you were responsible for getting that out in the mainstream 10 years before it might have been without you.
Yeah,
I would say.
I appreciate that. I loved being at the forefront of it. There wasn't anybody. Everybody was shocked that I was throwing them in tournaments. It was just kind of a swing for the fences, Southern California trout deal is what it was, as we talked about last time. That's really where it all came out of, just stocking trout in Southern California. That's where it really took off.
Obviously, you can catch them a variety of ways. Obviously, as a tournament guy, I'm guessing that you have the same perspective that a lot of guys like me who follow tournaments have, and that is that there's first place, and then there's a bunch of guys who aren't making much money.
Right.
How much did that inform your idea to go out there and swing for the fences?
When I was living tournament to tournament, and I was fishing out west, and Terry, to your point, when I was winning Orville or Don Pedro or Folsom or almost winning Shasta against Gary Dobbins, finishing second to Gary Dobbins, those were times when you're having to dethrone Gary Dobbins back then, when it was win or die, and you have to win at least a boat a year, because that's what you'd win, a boat a year, but you have to win one a year, take home that boat and sell it just to keep going. And that was how we lived, was off of winning that boat at a tournament. Gosh, if you win 2 tournaments, you get 2 boats, you're way better off. But that's where that swim bait had to be powerful. I knew that if I just went out there and threw a soft plastic bait, and was like everybody else, I could be a top 10 guy, but that's not going to get the bill paid. I'm not going to last in the West Coast being a top 10 guy. And I had some friends and mentors who were fantastic consistently fantastic anglers that taught me about fishing, but they were just, those kind of guys that could go out and catch good limits, not great limits, catch good limits and finish in the top 10 a lot. But that for me to do it for a living and want to make a living strictly at fishing and doing it out west, I had to win. You just had to win. And for me, the swim bait was the way for me to see the easy way for me to see a win.
What got you to throw it that first time in a tournament situation?
I think, and this was going way back. I would see opportunities where a lot of guys were throwing them for bed fishing, just for bed fishing to trigger a strike. And I shouldn't say a lot. There were a very few group of guys who knew they could fire into a bed. But I would see these fish chasing these little kokanee salmon around at Shasta. You'd see some mauled, bait fish. You'd see them. I told you guys the story about Clear Lake. Everybody knew they were eating that hitch, and I told you nobody knew what a hitch was. Remember that joke? Everybody thought that's what the boat meets the truck. That's all a hitch was. The word hitch was foreign to everybody, and not just Clear Lake, but all the lakes up there. I think I knew, going back to when I was fishing those baits in Southern California for the trout, knowing those big fish would react out of their brain unconsciously. That we talked about this. I could imagine what it was like for Dave Glebe and D. Thomas in the glory days of flipping and pitching. When nobody else was doing it, and they had volumes of unfished water to go to because everybody fished up to the target, but never fished in the target. And that's what D. Thomas and Dave Glebe were doing. Well, I saw that metamorphosis of a bass's personality completely change when they saw the big bait. So to your point, Terry, I had so much confidence in it that I thought I just need to figure out what big color and size they will eat, up in Northern California or out in Arizona or maybe in Nevada. If I could come bring a small swim bait over to the U.S. Open, which Folkstad knew I was doing, but never found out which one. I was incorporating a bigger bait than most people had seen at every lake I could, that I still felt, as long as I knew what the forage was, that was going to be a game changer, because those fish just didn't see them. And those fish would chase it to the boat. And like I told you guys last time, if you stop it at the boat, they eat it right there thinking it's still real. And your pause was the connection for them to eat it. That was so cool. I feel like I was lucky to have those glory days.
And then back in those days, you had Havasu, which if you caught 11 or 12 pounds of fish, you were in the top 3. And same thing with Oroville. If you had 9 pounds of fish a day, you were in the top 3. And using that swim bait and catching that one key 3-pounder,
right,
and a 3-pounder is going to smoke a 7-inch swim bait or a 9-inch swim bait.
That picture right there is from Havasu. Those fish right there, that's my daughter. That's funny you mentioned that, Terry, because that's the Havasu weigh-in. Those fish were eating a little jointed glide bait. That was a neat experience, because those fish right there in that picture were coming out of these. Everybody fishes the toolies at Havasu. Everybody fishes the toolies. When you throw a glide dip bait on the outside of that toolie line, those fish that you can't believe are even sitting in there come out and eat that bait off of your trolling motor through the toolies. I mean, and everybody's fished a worm, a drop shot, a jig, and everybody's fished. They pull their boats into those toolies, and fish deep in them. I'm staying on the outside, paralleling it with the glide bait, and literally drawing these good sized fish out of. They just come kamikazing out of toolies. It tells you they're still living in there, but they're just ignoring all the fishermen except for my glide bait. It's crazy, right? I mean, those were amazing times, just amazing.
Interesting that you bring up D. Thomas, Dave Glebe, the early flippers. And I tend to think of 1975, when D. Thomas came out and fished BASS and won in Arkansas. I tend to think of that as the beginning of the flipping era in terms of competitive fishing. I realized he was doing well, obviously, and winning a lot of stuff in California for a few years before that. But I think of that as the beginning of the flipping era in big time competition. And I think that the flipping era may be over now because of stuff like forward facing sonar and these guys who are throwing swim baits to fish that are not relating to structure or cover. Is that a fair statement, Byron? What do you think?
Man, I think a lot of things are over. It's crazy. What I think's happened with forward facing sonar is you're seeing right now a huge amount of the shallow bite, whether it's the frog bite, the flipping bite. A lot of those bites are I think I talked to Clun. Clun came to the U.S. Open, and so we were sharing a houseboat at the U.S. Open. I think Clun is hoping that, you know, a lot of those shallow fish get a lot less pressure because they're
Yeah.
not shallow anymore. You know, it's like everybody's out there for it. I think Clum's waiting for those fish to get smart enough to stay away from the sonar. So, you know, like you're pushing those fish out of range, which is happening. But the forward-facing sonar has changed so much that I'm sure it's hurt the tackle industry. I'm sure crankbait sales are way down. Hardbait sales are way down. You know, you think of everything but a small piece of plastic with a jig head must be way down as far as tackle sales, because that forward-facing sonar has really kind of it's eliminated, to your point, Ken, the flipping, pitching, frog, all of the, you know, attack bites, the shallow water, you know, strictly shut all of your electronics off and go to the bank bite. And I think Clun's hoping that the sooner those fish get wise to the forward-facing sonar, but all those kids are still out there chasing them, the better it's going to be for the shallow water angler. You know, maybe that's going to be the case.
If you were still out on the trail, would you be one of those guys who would embrace the technology and see it as something you have to learn to stay competitive, or would you go a different direction?
Great question.
Uh-oh. There he is. We lost you for a second.
We're jumping around. Let's make it more exciting. Now I'm over here. Hi, guys. Okay.
Hey.
Oh, now I'm back. This is fun. It's like leapfrogging back and forth.
Fun for you. I'm dizzy.
Yeah. I just fished the U.S. Open. I did horrible at the U.S. Open, and I tried really hard to embrace forward-facing sonar. I was so frustrated by so many guys doing it in areas that I pull into and doing it in ways that I never even thought about. At the U.S. Open, I never thought about this. It's a shared weight event. I pulled in an area where I had found some fish. The co-angler was on the big motor driving around, and the pro was up at the front with the big motor on, just scanning the whole time. And they were picking off fish on the big motor. I'm like, I had to go back to the tournament director and say, is this legal?
Yeah, that's not legal a lot of places.
If they both have life jackets on, both butts don't have to be in the seat at that tournament. I was like, oh my gosh. Like I'm these young guys are literally telling their co-anglers just to drive them around, and all they're doing is just scanning back and forth. When they put it in neutral and then they cast to the fish, I'm like, oh, this is so lopsided now. And I'm over there going, I'm you know, like we talked about, Terry, I'm old now, and so it's like I'm still trying to catch on to it, but I'm frustrated. I'm really frustrated by it because it's such a hard learning curve for an older person. It really is, and that's the way I see it. I mean, it's showing in the standings. You know, the guys that
it takes the hunt out of it, really. Yeah. I mean, and using intuition in order to find where the fish should be, and
everything that we did. I've heard so many things on this, and really your fishing skills are irrelevant now. You know, your true, what we knew as fishing skills. Now it's your electronic skills. Now it's how many transducers do you have? How well can you read them? How accurate are you on reading your bait with the transducer and scanning fish, and the guesswork of like us going out and breaking down a lake is gone.
Yeah.
You know, and I loved breaking down a lake. I was just telling someone the other day that, you know, the best thing in the world is when the patterns coming together. And it's a pattern, you know, that's coming together through the course of the day of competition, and you're getting more and more excited because you're starting to be able to call your shots. Well, there's a mystery there and a magic there that you're able to call the shot. And it's not that you're looking at the fish. You're kind of getting an idea what they finally are relating to. And you're like, hey, I think I got this figured out, you know. And when I go around the corner to the next spot, I'm like, I can actually pick where those fish are going to be in the next cove, having never been in that cove before. And those were beautiful times. And those times are out the window now with these. You just pull up, put your trolling motor down, scan, you don't see them, you leave. You know, it's frustrating for me.
Yeah.
You know, we're talking about what seems like a long time ago now, but since Terry, Byron, and I are all about the same age, we can tell you it seems like yesterday. But Byron, back in the 90s, I bet most of our audience doesn't know about this. Rick Clunn put together a 4-volume series of magazines, books he called Angler's Quest. Mm-hmm. And I know you're tight with Clunn, and you were part of that, and you wrote some really interesting stories in that series. And I don't want to just here, but let's say it was very new agey.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
No, it's totally fair. It's totally fair.
It was all about the magic of communing with nature and developing a rapport with nature and the fish and so forth. Do you still feel that way about the angling experience?
I feel that way. Unfortunately, it doesn't translate to tournaments like it used to. Now it's so highly electronic that purity of fishing for me. Being in the zone and fishing in the zone and getting to a point where you feel like whether you win or lose, you're fishing a flawless tournament. Your execution is good. You're not losing any fish. You are the best angler you can be at that time for that weekend or that 3 or 4 day event. It's like there's this euphoria and this high that you're on when you're driving around the lake. And all the other boats are just marker buoys. They're not even sure. I should say they're just out of in your way. You go around the corner, you see a boat, you're like, it doesn't matter. I know where the fish are. Like, I don't care. I don't care if that's Kevin Van Dam or Randy Howell or Denny Brower or Casey Ashley. It doesn't matter who it is. I'm just going to not pay attention. I don't the fish are doing so well. Oh, there we go. Hey, I'm over here. Oh, there we go.
Jeez.
Anybody getting dizzy? We're
I
playing
I'm gonna puke.
Guess where we're at now.
It's like a shell game.
It is a shell game. I loved the days, the tournaments, the experiences I had, and the magic. To your point, Ken, the magic seems to be gone because I was so frustrated at the U.S. Open this year, and it was all electronics. I couldn't decide whether I should shut them off because I'm scaring the fish, because you could feel the fish were just getting harder and harder to catch every day. And the guy that won it, Kyle Grover, was talking about, he was having to be casting. He was only seeing him at 115 to 120 feet out.
Holy crap.
They were gone. And you could see them disappearing on your screen all the time. And I'm like, these fish are getting blitzkrieged by these electronics. And even if you shut them off, the fishing just turned horrible because there was so much noise in the water, if you will. The boats, all the electronics, the forward-facing sonars. It's a small lake. It's Mojave, and it was tough.
And it's clear. I mean,
it's clear. Yep.
It's 25, 30-foot visibility.
Right.
So that even just adds to it.
Exactly. It's clear. There's no grass. It's water and rock mostly. There's no grass. There's bait fish and stripers and everybody was complaining about, and you have like a 10-day practice period. So guys were practicing for 10 days on that lake.
Jeez.
So, they used to not have it off limits at all, and they finally implemented off limits. But I wish they would have like a 2 or 3 day off limits, not even 10 days, because at least give us a chance, give the fish a chance. Give us a chance to maybe have that experience.
I have a question for you. Of all the river lakes that you grew up fishing, I grew up fishing, what was your favorite?
Until this last U.S. Open, it was Mojave.
Oh, my God.
As a kid, I went there as a kid. When I did the Hall of Fame, we each had the Hall of Fame, and I gave the speech about I grew up fishing Mojave from the bank when Steve Oliver used to take me there, and at Cottonwood Cove. I mean, I loved pulling up in my boat and looking at the shoreline that I used to walk as a 13, 14, 15-year-old bass crazy kid. During the tournament, everybody would put their boats in the water. I had to wait till I was 16 to fish a tournament. So I would just walk the banks all around the marina, and I'd catch all these fish. And then when Steve would come in, the poor guy would be like, "Hey man, I caught 13 pounds walking the bank," And he's like, "It's not the same thing," because he'd come in with 8 pounds all day long or 9 pounds, and I'd have 13, 14 pounds. Well, yeah, I'm in the marina, I'm at the buoy line, and I'm fishing off the bank. But Terry, to your point, it was that place to me is special because that's where my mentor and the guy that raised me like a father took me when I was a young angler dying to become a professional fisherman. So Mojave has the most sentimental attachment, and it was just frustrating that this year it was such a miserable tournament. Thanks to forward facing.
For the folks who are not familiar with the U.S. Open, it is one of the great traditions in the sport. And I guess it started in the very early 80s.
81.
Byron's won it twice.
Yep.
He's one of a handful of guys who've won more than once. He's a legend. He's a Hall of Famer. And it used to be just on Mead. For decades, it was only on Mead. And now they're kind of moving it around. So it was on Mojave. And I hate to backtrack to forward-facing sonar, but let me go back one more time because it's such a hot button issue out there. Byron, you, me, Terry, we're not innocent on technology. When we got started, there were flashers. Soon after, there were paper graphs. But now people seem to be really polemic on this forward-facing stuff. Where would you draw your line in the sand with regard to technology and competition?
I love talking to Rick Clun about this stuff. Again, he's his input, and he said it's just too early. It's too early to really cast a hard vote either way, because I'm still thinking those fish are acclimating to it. I know it's really tough, but I mean, we talked about this, that I mean, when Daryl Lawrence first came out with the Lawrence, wasn't it banned in? I know you know this, Ken. I mean, wasn't it banned in Minnesota, or did they?
No, that was it was the paper graph in 1975 that they were trying to ban in Minnesota.
Yeah,
but when it came out in 57 in the 60s, there were people trying to ban the flasher.
The flasher. That's what I think Rick told me that was banned in 1 or 2 states. I thought that's what Rick had told me, that the flasher, because people thought that even the flasher was some kind of and that was just to read the bottom mostly, but you could see a fish on it. But so I'm hoping the fish, and they're really amazing how fast they figure this out. Rick tells me that you go to Missouri, Table Rock, and Bull Shoals and all that, and you can't get within casting range of those fish on the forward facing sonar anymore. You're literally pushing them out of your way. They know you're there, and you can't make a cast far enough. And so some of the people that have been helping Rick try to understand it are saying, hey, it's getting to the point now where we can't catch them off it because it's too far. Those fish know that they're being shot. So that's why at the U.S. Open this year, I was doing a lot of shutting it off, because I had a pretty good U.S. Open last year, except for my, some stuff. But I was running quiet. I was running super quiet. I was shutting everything off, because to your point, Terry, it's a clear lake, and I love fishing with no electronics if I can. I want that boat to be so silent. I'd rather have the stereo on so it sounds like a ski boat. Because I'm trying to think of a ski boat.
No, they're not.
Funny story
like
about
that.
At Havasu, when you pull into a cove and you shut your electronics off and there's a bunch of skiers and partiers in there, you catch a lot more fish, because the sound of your trolling motor and your lack of electronics is either drowned it out, but those fish are a lot more comfortable when there's a big party going on in there. But when you pull into a quiet, peaceful cove, you have your electronics on, you're just another guy making all that same exact scary sound, and you don't catch as many fish. So I learned years ago it was better to have a lot of noise going on anywhere at a lake and fishing around noise, because those fish are desensitized to the sound of our predatory bass boats, because our boats sound predatory in the water.
I know guys, well, you guys are probably a lot more familiar with this stuff than I am, but in the striper world, and I used to live in Georgia around Lanier, and in that striper world, there's a thing called a thumper. Have you all heard about this?
Mm-mm.
It's a device. It is a noise-making box that you lay on the hull of your boat, as close to your interior of your hull as you can get, and it just goes bam, bam. You can set the pace and all of it, and they say it draws stripers to it.
Wow.
They'll swear to me that it'll draw stripers, and they'll say that they're also catching a bunch of big spots and other fish that are coming to it as well.
Wow.
Now, a spot is a real curious fish, at least in my experience, but I'm amazed at the bizarre electronics we have out there, the hydrowave, the thumper, and now all this other stuff. And I wonder how much of it, obviously forward facing is pretty dang effective, but I'm wondering how much of the other stuff is truly driving fish away versus calling them in, how much of it is depending upon that individual fish.
Yeah. I think one of the fun things we used to do with Livingston Lures all the time, whenever you do a boat show or you go to a fishing show, you drop that thing in the water and the fish come out with no hooks on it. They'll just peck at that thing. I mean, this is a lure that's making it's a hidewave built into a fishing lure. That's basically the best way to explain
Right.
Livingston, any Livingston bait. All the Livingston baits have the little microchip and the little soundboard in them and the little speaker. And it was really, really cool, Ken, to your point, just to drop it in there and watch the bluegill come peck at your rattle trap, your lipless bait. It's a lipless Livingston, but because it's giving off that crunchy little sound of a distressed bait fish,
Right.
They come up and they hit the thing with no hooks on it just because it's like making a noise, and they're like peck, 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 peck at it. You're like, and that sells a lot of baits at a show when the people are standing around the aquarium and they've seen every guy go up there, and then you throw a thing in the water and you just hold it there and the fish literally swim right up to it because it's noise, just like a hydro wave. Guys all the time when they used to have hydro waves, you'd see the fish coming to your trolling motor, and they'd swim up to your trolling motor where the speaker was, and then they'd eventually realize they're coming towards the boat and they'd swim off. And I saw that a ton of times at Lake Mead with schools of stripers. And you'd have your hydro wave on and you'd see a giant, it looks like an underwater pyramid because it's like a pyramid of fish, and it's a moving pyramid that's coming towards your boat from under. We only had 2D at the time, so our sonars are reading straight down, but deep down there'd be these schools of stripers. They'd hear that hydro wave and they'd come shooting up, and it'd be like a pyramid of fish, and they'd come all the way up, like, oh, look at all the fish coming to the boat, and then they'd realize it wasn't a school of shad, which they thought it was, because it was a shadow and it was on the surface and it sounded like bait because it was a hydro wave. And so they're rushing from 30, 40, 50 feet of water up. And then they realize that's a boat. And they all go back down. They disperse. And I can't tell you, it was crazy to see that with a hydro wave on.
That is amazing. I think Rick Clunn makes a great point when he says it's too early, because I don't think we have a ton of significant data. It's been out, that technology's been out since 2018 when Garmin introduced Panoptics, but it wasn't until this past year that there was a significant boost in the catch rate in the Elite Series. And that could be due to the venues that were chosen, the weather that happened by, or it could be due to forward facing. It's hard to say. Yep. Hey, Nathan is bringing us in some questions now. Good deal, Nathan. Thank you. Terry, you got that one? Dr. Drop?
It just says thumpers are used here in Texas by the sand bass and hybrid striper guides. Sounds like a hammer beating against the bottom of a boat.
Oh, so he's familiar with it.
Yeah, I never heard of it.
It makes a racket. It sounds like, the worst neighbor you've ever had. If you were near a boat doing this, you would think, oh my God, I got to get away from this guy. He's alerting every fish in this section of the lake.
Hey, the only time I've done it is out in the ocean fishing shark. You hit the side of the boat with a
like Jaws.
Set. Yeah, right. And drawing the sharks.
Draws up. You just got to bang the diving thing and get him to eat it.
Exactly.
That was a Jaws moment when he banged on the tank, the diving tank, to get the shark to eat the tank.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And
we actually did it.
Yeah.
Nathan, there was an early question by Academic Mailbox that came in really early. I'm going to ask that one, Byron, if you don't mind. Academic Mailbox, there's a handle for you. Could Byron say something about his experience of saltwater species fishing and how it influenced his freshwater approaches?
Yes, a great question, because I grew up in Southern California, Orange County, starting off in the ocean, fishing.
HB, dude.
HB, exactly. Off the
what is HB?
Huntington Beach.
Huntington Beach, California, Surf City, USA. Like every great surf song, and it's just, and that's a legendary surf little town. Not so little anymore, unfortunately, but I grew up in that town, went to Huntington Beach High School, and the inshore bite was really what kind of dialed me in, and that was where I had the aha moment with swim bait fishing, was that I was fishing calico bass, white sea bass, sand bass out on the Huntington Beach Flats, Laguna Beach, Newport Beach, Horseshoe Kelp, Catalina Island, all the islands out there, Channel Islands, San Clemente. And it was, I didn't like the offshore stuff nearly as much, but the inshore bite was paramount in me having the confidence to throw the bigger baits for bass, because I had already thrown all that. I was throwing that a lot in the inshore saltwater, Southern California inshore saltwater fishing. So that was a huge influence for me, and it really did help me know the cadence. I mean, swim bait fishing isn't easy. You got to have the right rod, you got to have the right reel, you got to have the right feel, you got to have the right cadence, you got to have confidence in it. A lot of guys, especially back in the day, would say, man, it's not an easy thing to learn. It's like I can go out and learn drop shotting in a day pretty easily, or any of these techniques I see from Japan. These finesse techniques are pretty easy to learn because you catch so many fish on them. You don't get a lot of bites to begin with on a swim bait. So my experience of getting a hell of a lot of bites inshore saltwater fishing in Southern California, on big baits, soft plastic baits, the Worm King we talked about. I remember I pulled it out, the galvanized hook, and the old soft plastic Worm King, and just throwing these dinosaur baits. It was great. It helped a lot.
Yeah, you'd go out there and catch, a pound calico or a pound and a half calico or a sand bass on an 8 or a 9-inch flipping Worm King.
Yep.
It's like, what the hell is this thing trying to do?
Yep. And that showed you, right? And the bass are the same way. So it's exactly, largemouth bass are no different than the calicos and the sand bass that are eating back then, shocking us back then. These kids now, it's just a foregone conclusion that these bass will eat an 8, 10, 12-inch bait. For us, you would have never believed it 30 years ago. You would have thought you were crazy if you were throwing a 10 or 12-inch bait, thinking you'd get a strike. You know, they thought you lost your mind if you pulled that out of your rod box back then, and they did. So, yeah.
You've done, people don't realize the sacrifices that Byron Velvick made as a young guy to get out there and to compete at the highest levels. I mean, he always had the talent, but not everybody's always had the bankroll. And one of the stories I've heard you talk about a little bit, Byron, was some of the work you did on the party boats.
Yeah.
I guess the offer. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think those are amazing stories.
Yeah, I was in order. My mom, I was raised by my mom, single mom, you know, a school teacher. Dad left early, so my mom wasn't. I didn't have a silver spoon. I didn't have anybody buying me a boat or you know, bankrolling my fishing career by any means. It was everything I could do to fish, and she used to take me to these docks in Newport Beach, down at Balboa Landing and Seal Beach. And she would just drop me off to get on these boats to go fishing. And so she'd give me the money, and she gave me enough money to have a hamburger and a drink and some French fries and fish. And she knew she'd put me on the boat. And then at 3 o'clock, she'd come pick me up. You know, and that was what she used to do, is drive me to these places. And I got on these boats, and I made friends with the deckhands, and I got to know the captains, and I became a deadhead. You guys know what a deadhead is. I was a young deadhead. And a deadhead is the kid that gets on the boat for free. Plus, they give him all the food he wants. He can eat all the free hamburgers you want, French fries. But you're in the jackpot. And when you win the jackpot, you just give it to the crew. So literally, you give the crew the jackpot. They don't even give you any money for it. Your job is to win the jackpot. You're a raker. You're a seated little. And I was so nondescript. You know, here's this young kid. But they would give me a brown bait. They'd say, "Hey, go up to the front, because there's, you know, something up there that I need to throw a brown bait on." And they would help me know how to win the deadhead jackpot. And the jackpot was just cherry picking. So I started deadheading, you know, when I was young, and then I got offered the gig to start doing some deckhanding, and I loved it. It was just neat to be a deckhand and a deadhead on those boats. And that, I mean, when you're winning the jackpot as a young guy, you're like, if I make money fishing, even though I give it to the deckhands and the captain, I'm still hooked on competitive fishing. So my introduction to real competitive fishing was jackpot deadheading on those party boats, Ken.
I love that story. Thank you for sharing that. That's a beautiful story.
That's how it all started.
What boats did you work on?
The Fury 2, the Fury, the Freelance, the Matt Walsh. Remember the Matt Walsh? That thing burned down, I think. The Matt Walsh,
it did.
The Fury, the Freelance, Thunderbird. God, I can't remember the rest of them. They threw us on every boat out there, man.
Yeah, I worked on the Aztec, the El Dorado, and the Pacific out of Queens.
Did you?
Yes.
Know that about?
Yeah.
Were you deckhanding?
I was decking. Yeah, I never deadheaded. I just started decking.
Okay.
You know, all my friends like Greg Vela, you know, he was a skipper.
Yeah.
You know, I knew the Ashleys from just fishing.
Yeah.
And just started decking. Worked on there.
What boat did you work on, Ken?
The boat my dad got me, a 12-foot Sears aluminum John boat.
Did you scrub the deck?
Yeah, man, I did everything. It was used when I got it too. So yeah, I scrubbed everything. I thought that.
Did you ever have to clean 800 sand bass on a 3-mile drive back into the dock?
I'm about to say, Ken, you got off easy, because you have no idea the crap that Terry and I used to have to do, man. Those were long days, man. Long.
Man, I was on a farm in South Carolina. I did not have the bright lights of Huntington Beach.
You didn't have all the squid and anchovies on the deck, and like Terry's point, cleaning all the fish for all the ungrateful fishermen.
Yeah, getting a buck of fish.
Yeah,
I had to milk cows in the morning and in the evening. So I give you guys no slack. I'm milking cows out there. You guys are fishing. I envy you. Hey, Nathan, we got a good question from Racer Ryu. I don't even know how you say that. I know it's our buddy David Shong. It's up there, not far from Academic Mailbox, but here it is. Terry, you got that one?
Yeah, we've seen the swim bait be a part of a rotation, but do you guys think that we'll see another tour level win where the big swim bait is the primary lure?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it still has, and I think especially with forward-facing sonar, you might be able to get some of those fish to react to that. if you have the right bait and you're throwing it, you can maybe bypass their wariness with the electronics. So I think that yes, I think that there's probably coming a big tournament win when they're done throwing all the little stuff and you can throw a big bait because it gives off a big signal when you throw it. I love throwing the thing on forward facing center because you can see it so easily and you can see the fish react to it. So I think there is that potential to do that. Yeah.
Well, Milliken did
cool.
it this year at Toledo Bend. I mean, he weighed 34 pounds.
Who did?
That Ben Milliken in the Open.
Yeah.
And he weighed 34 pounds, and I think every fish he caught that day was on the swim bait. So
that's going to happen. There's going to be a real big blowout, a big heavy weight. I just hope they don't catch 83 pounds, 5 ounces for 3 days.
It'll never happen. Yeah.
I love that
record.
I love that record is still, after all those years, that record's still there. So I pray to God nobody goes out on a 3-day event and catches 83.5 pounds or more.
And folks, what Byron's talking about there is more than 20 years he has had the BASS record for a 3-day tournament, 5-fish limit at 83 pounds, 5 ounces, which is massive.
I can't believe that's still
very tough, man.
One. I cannot believe that record is still out there. I thought that record would be crushed a long time ago.
Well, yeah, folks, Byron's got some big records. Byron cuts a wide swath through his career in professional fishing. He didn't stay out there as long as I wanted him to. He had some neck issues similar to what I have personally. And but this guy was killing it. We see a lot of guys out there who have had a lot of success on some of the big swim baits. Steve Kennedy, of course, notably in the Elite Series. Brandon Palaniuk throws a lot of big baits. Who else out there is really talented that you know about?
Man, I think most of the young guys now are. It's amazing. I mean, these young guys now, and I don't even know their names, but I mean, I know Zaldane, and Palaniuk, obviously. He I think I told you the story. He used to come to all my seminars.
Is that right?
That Palaniuk, when he was young, he used to come. I mean, he was like everywhere you would go, you'd see him sitting in the audience. And he would come up and he was going to every pros seminar, especially when he knew that was their specialty, and taking notes. And of course, we're just divulging everything to the audience because we're in there in a room and questions and answers and just giving it all away. And it's well before internet stuff. And it's just authentic because it's coming from you after 20, 30 years of doing it. And I remember Palaniuk, was like, I'm going to fish against you guys someday. He goes, I'm going to be on the tour someday. And I go, man, I hope to see you out there. And I remember like going to some of the shows and meeting him, and he'd come up after my seminar and ask me more questions. Man, when he showed up on tour, thankfully I was still there. And it was really cool because everything I had ever talked about, tuning swim baits, detuning swim baits, little deep fishing, shallow fishing, every little niche thing I knew, I gave out at seminars. And I think he took notes on all of it. So that made him a darn good swim bait fisherman because he did that with everybody. I think he probably went to every seminar. If Aaron was talking about something, that he knew was Aaron's specialty, he's going to be at Aaron's seminar. I think we all saw Palaniuk hanging around, this kid from Idaho, and he's in Louisiana, he's in Mississippi, he's in Alabama, he's bouncing around the country, and he's taking in all this information. And he truly was a young student of the sport. That I remember that clearly about Palaniuk.
Sounds like he wasn't shy either. He was willing to go up and introduce himself.
I clearly remembered him before he ever fished against us, just saying, I'm going to be there someday. And that was super cool for him to be there. And then I think when Gunnersville, when he was fishing around me, when I got second and Skeet got first, so it was neat to share. He comes in there, he's hey man, and it was neat to have him. He knew I was doing well in the tournament, and he left me alone. He's a really class act guy, and he's a heck of a guy. He's just a heck of a fisherman. He doesn't get anywhere near you if he knows you're doing well. He doesn't poach your water, and he doesn't try to help you catch your fish. And he's just a good friend.
That's wonderful. I remember when I was young and I could go to a tournament near where I was living as a kid. I could go to a tournament maybe on Lake Murray, and I'd see all the guys I idolized in the magazines, guys like Clun and Dance and Martin and Galeeby. And there was not a force on this earth that was going to make me walk up to those guys and introduce myself or ask for an autograph. I didn't have the guts.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm
the same way. I woke up to someone at ICAST if I don't know him today. I mean, it just, I don't want to go bug him,
Yeah.
It's probably a fault, but
No,
Oh,
these
I'm
young
obnoxious about that
people,
now.
they're like
I'll,
they ask you questions, man. They come up, they want to know something, they want to say, hey, I heard this, I heard that, and it's like passing the torch and sharing that information. I don't I welcome those young anglers because a lot of guys when I was young were giving me a really hard time. So I remember the old guard made it really hard for me when I was coming up, and Aaron too, and a lot of the guys, it was really we were definitely, it was like we were trying to steal money from those guys, and they treated you. And I swore moving forward, if I was ever one of those guys, I wouldn't be like that. So what happened was when the young guys were talking to me at seminars, man, I encouraged them. I hope to see you there. When I'd see them on the tour, man, good luck. Welcome to the tour. Hope you do well. Let's talk about stuff. And I just didn't want to be a victim of what I was when I was young.
We got any more questions?
we got a lot of good questions in there, Nathan.
Yeah,
can
I
you
could just keep
pop them in there
scrolling
when you
up.
have a chance? Here we go.
All right, at Byron, what modern big swim baits get you excited to fish?
Modern big swim baits. I've been retired so long. What modern big swim baits are out there? That's embarrassing because nowadays these guys come up and go, hey, what about this or that? And I'm like, man, I don't even know what you're talking about because I hung it up so long ago. I'm not chasing. I'm not buying tackle anymore. I think I told you guys I'm selling everything. I'm downsizing. So, I took the last thing I did with Livingston was I just made what I thought was a perfect glide bait. That was something I did. And I took everything I knew at the time about all the great glide baits that were hyper expensive. I wanted great action. I like the sound technology, but I also used the true tungsten stuff in it. And so a lot of guys don't realize how good a bait that is, but for glide baits, it's a much better bait than most people realize. And modern day swim baits, I'm just old school, man. I'm still throwing the bass tricks. I still, I got some of the, what was the most recent ones for the US Open that I just bought? The Hazadon, the Mega Bass Hazadons. I'm not sponsored. I don't mind talking about any bait that I get my hands on and trying them out. A lot of them, I don't like anything more than a single joint bait. So all those double jointed, triple jointed baits, they don't look real to me. I think that a single bait glide bait, that's why with Livingston, I said, we're only going to do a single joint. It's that one single glide. These things that go through the water looking like a snake, I'm going to do this. But, that's not what a fish swims like. So you get these triple joint baits, these double joint baits, and to me, it looks like they have a broken spine. And I think they catch more fishermen than they catch fish. And that's the problem with a lot of these swim baits. They do catch a lot of fishermen because they look so good in the water, but they don't look real in the water. They just look good in the water. But not in a fish natural good, more like hey, that's got a really weird slithery action. It's like a bass snake or a fish snake. And so, yeah.
Let's get a plug in for your eBay store. Because for everybody listening, Byron's about to put a big bunch of stuff of his gear on eBay for anybody to purchase. And this will be stuff. Some of this stuff has actually been on the water used by Byron Velvick. All of this stuff is stuff Byron Velvick believes in. It's stuff that he acquired for a reason and has used, but maybe he doesn't have a particular use for it anymore. So Byron, how can they find your stuff?
Well, don't forget, I'm sending you each a Bass Center hat because I got the Loudmouth Bass hats and the Bass Center hats. And then
I love a Bass Center hat in particular.
Those are new. I'm sending you guys both Loudmouth. I wish I actually told one guy bought a Loudmouth Bass on my site, and he wanted me to sign the Bass Center one, but then he said, "Is there any chance you can get Zona to sign the?" And I go, "If I see Zona, if we do a show together again, I'll have him sign because I got all these big giant boxes of Bass Center and Loudmouth Bass hats, along with all my tackle. But it's Byron's Bunker. It's just Byron's Bunker on eBay, and it's all one word, Byron's Bunker. And I'm not doing anything now because I learned the hard way that when you do eBay during Christmas, you have to go stand in line to ship everything, and the line post office awful. And then, and a lot of times if I miss something for Christmas, it's like, man, I'm going to try to get it to you, but I may not get it in time. So I said, I'm going to wait till the fishing season starts. I think January, February, I'm going to start. I'm getting it already now. It's all sitting over there. A lot of tackle. I just don't need it anymore. I got so much fishing tackle. It'll take me 2 or 3 years to sell it all. And I'm just going to sell it. Yeah. I go to my house at the Amistad. I got the lake house in Del Rio, and there's just boxes and boxes and boxes of my sponsors' baits that they sent. And I'm not fishing professionally anymore, so I might as well sell it. I'm not getting any younger. I'm not competing anymore. I'm not going to go back to competing. So I got some fantastic stuff, and it's all kinds of stuff, but I'm just going to put it all in Byron's bunker. Yeah. And I did a lot of it last year. I do it in waves, and I definitely need to get it going as soon as Christmas quiets down. Byron's bunker.
Byron's bunker. Check it out, folks.
Each of you guys, a bass center, loudmouth bass hat for sure. I love it.
Yeah,
Those. I love that.
Loudmouth bass, of course, not
history,
just
man.
Mark Zona, but also Jay Kumar.
Yep.
And that was kind of where Mark Zona kind of got discovered, and the folks at JM Associates plucked him out of there, and he became kind of took over when Jerry McInnes kind of stepped down and more or less retired. But if you don't mind, let's talk Bass Center for just a minute, because that was supposed to be the cornerstone of that bass fishing block on ESPN beginning in like 2005. I think it started on the first day of 2005, and it was you and there was a NASCAR guy,
John Kernan.
who was John Kernan. Thank you.
John Kernan
who seemed
was
like
my
a
co-host.
super nice guy.
Kernan. Yep, John Kernan. He was the guy that knew television. So they had me as the analyst, and they had him as the guy that could read the teleprompter, and he was Mr. TV. So you had to have the quarterback, and you had to have the guy that you threw to. So Kernan was always throwing to me, and they just wanted my analysis of everything. So I'm in the studio. But to your point, it was neat. ESPN owned fishing at the time. They bought the tour, so they owned bass. The story was they never had a chance with NASCAR. They basically televised NASCAR, but they didn't own NASCAR, and NASCAR got away from them. And they, at the time, were going to do bass fishing, buy Bassmaster, own Bassmaster, promote Bassmaster. And so they let the the center was the only time they took that center and put it on something. There's never been soccer center, football center, baseball center, hockey center, but there was Bass Center. So in Sports Center and Bass Center. And that was, we launched, it was January of either 2005 or 2006, because it was right.
2005.
Was it 5?
Yeah.
So it was directly after The Bachelor, like right after The Bachelor, as I finished The Bachelor in the fall. And then, of course, they're like, hey, there's this show we want you to, we're thinking about doing. And so I went in there, and funny enough, Zona and I knew each other. We talked all the time on the phone. We had never met each other till we were both in the studio together. And we were friends via phone, talking to each other, because he was this cool dude that had this really cool vibe about him up in Michigan, a smallmouth guy, fun to talk to on the phone. And we would share information. We just became friends before we ever met. And we met in the studio together in Charlotte, North Carolina. That's where we filmed all the shows. And it was weird.
Yeah.
Zona, him and Jay Kumar were Loudmouth Bass, and John Kernan and I were Bass Center. And Bass Center was this amazing show. Just an amazing show that was part of the whole ESPN fishing block.
It was a neat show. I really enjoyed it because you guys were covering some newsy stuff. I even got to appear on it a time or two about some weird issue or something. But where John Kernan was a weird fit to me was, while he was kind of a NASCAR guy and an expert, he didn't have any meaningful experience in the world of bass fishing. So quite often he would appear to be the layperson who doesn't know anything, and you would spend a lot of time on the show explaining how something would work to him. And I thought maybe, that might be missing the audience a little bit. Mm-hmm. What did you think about that? Did you feel like it was dumbing it down too much for the audience?
That's a great question, Ken. And of course they do all these New York polls with ESPN, and we originally started, and this is something I missed completely. We originally started as being two, and the term they came out with was we were too tour centric. We were over the heads of most people watching Bass Center, because we were so into the tournaments and so into the Kevin Van Dam story and so into the competition that literally they came back around after all the focus groups and and they were looking at the swath of the whole audience, the big picture of the ratings. And they said, people want to know how to catch more fish. That's what people want from this show. They don't want us talking about a points race. They don't want us talking about the hardcore. These people are watching it so they can learn. So Byron, your new job, this is during the show. They go, your new job with Bass Center is not to be talking so much about the tour and the competition that you're currently doing, but break down how these tournaments are being won. What's the takeaway from the wacky style Cinco? What's the takeaway from the float and fly? Whatever it is that wins that tournament. Now we're going to have Byron go out on the water and do a little 1 minute, 2 minute vignette on what just won the tournament. And that resonated heavily with the whole audience. And that's where John Kernan was probably a good fit, because he was the whole audience, if you will. Like there were those of us, Ken and Terry, that are deep in the trenches of the tour. So we are tour centric. And there is that microcosm of us that are really chasing the points race and really watching that drama of the elite tour unfold. But then a lot of the people watching on Saturday morning just wanted to catch more fish. And they said, how are the pros catching more fish than I am? So why doesn't Byron Velvick go out there and do a thing on what just won the last tournament? And it was really neat to get the feedback from people all around the country saying, hey, my son and I just won our local club tournament after your show last week based on what you
Very
did.
nice.
Thank you. That was so cool, right? Like the
Yeah.
fan, awesome. It's like Byron did a segment on this, and the next weekend we won the tournament doing what Byron did on Bass Center. And you're like, that is so cool. Because that was the neat part about the show. It was live taped to live. So it was taped every single Friday night for Saturday morning, and it was put together on Friday night so that Saturday morning you could watch it, and it was very relevant to that exact time and that exact place. You could turn on the television, watch ESPN, and you knew what to fish next week.
Yep.
You were a natural. You were so good on camera, so good working with Kernan. It was a very smooth show, and I was disappointed that whole bass block didn't make it. I mean, Bass Center lasted as long as any of them. Of course, the only thing that ultimately survived was the show that had been on for decades before, the Bass Masters. But I enjoyed it. I thought it was a nice effort. One place where I thought Bass really went wrong, though, was in thinking that Bass and BASS was going to be a replacement for NASCAR. They're just such different animals, and I thought they messed up there. Their interest in NASCAR, and to your point earlier when you said they lost NASCAR, who do they bring in to run BASS after they buy it? They bring in Dean Kessel, who came from the world of NASCAR. Who do they bring in to co-host Bass Center with you? But John Kernan, who had been a NASCAR announcer. And it just seemed like a big commitment in the wrong direction to me.
Yep. It was, and as soon as they got rid of the whole block when the people that were at the top all left, and it was when Shapiro and those guys left, and they were our bosses, Quinzel and Shapiro and everybody. I got a phone call while I was fishing on the tour, and they said the show's been canceled. All the shows were canceled at the same time. The new guy came in. He wanted no more fins and feathers on his network. We are a stick and ball network. We are going to stick and ball only. So no more Saturday morning fins and feathers. That's all done. And that ended instantly. So suddenly we all lost.
Was it making money or was it losing money?
It was just a new regime came in. You know the deal with any business when a new regime comes in, they just want they want to upset everything. So he wanted soccer instead. So instead they went to soccer. So when the whole outdoor block went away, they signed on with the soccer deal. So I always joke about the fact that soccer took the whole outdoor programming away from ESPN. That was my take on it, because I never even got to go back to the studio and say goodbye to everybody. I never had a final show. It was over a phone call. Like, we're going to send you all your stuff that's in the cubicle, but it's over just like that. I never saw John Kernan again after we did a show and thought we were going to do another show. I didn't go back for a goodbye show or a farewell show. My producer, Jerry Goodman, all the guys that were the editors, all my friends. We used to go out and, make the show and go have dinner and have drinks and all that. I have not seen any of them since we did a show that we thought was just another show. And suddenly the new guy came in and he just immediately canceled the whole block. I was shocked.
I'd love to get your take and see if you agree with this statement, Byron. A lot of people from that year, I was working in the communications department of BASS at that time. And so I was involved in a lot of ESPN meetings for no good reason, really. But I never felt like ESPN, the Connecticut company, in Bristol, Connecticut, had much respect or regard for the sport of bass fishing.
We were the redheaded stepchild, man. I tell you that.
Oh,
we were
yeah.
in Charlotte, North Carolina. I never, ever, ever went to Connecticut. With all my time with ESPN, I never even got invited to go up to the mothership and see the mothership. And to that point,
the mothership is impressive, my friend. It is impressive.
I've never been to the mothership, and I got my checks and everything from ESPN, Disney, and I would do these things in New York with ESPN, but I was like, when do we get to go? And they would laugh. They're like, no, this is all the mothership rejects down here doing this show.
And I know you had. You and I actually wound up in some of the same meetings together where we'd talk with some ESPN producer. And by the way, any producer or videographer or somebody like that who was assigned to bass fishing had just been demoted. He had pissed somebody off.
Fact. These were great editors, great everything, great all that. And they were basically they were sent to the salt mines. And the salt mine was Charlotte, North Carolina, doing College University. They had College U, and they had the fishing shows there. So those were the two shows that were going on, and we had all the college guys, the College University guys going filming down there. But those were the two things that were filming in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Yeah, anybody assigned to bass fishing was in television Siberia, and you sit in these meetings with these people who wouldn't be able to identify a bass in a lineup with a giraffe and a porcupine.
Right.
And you'd have the most. I remember distinctly one time trying to explain culling to somebody, and they asked this question about shore lunch.
What?
What if they want to keep a fish for a shore lunch? And at the time, I think I joked, well, maybe Takahiro.
Yeah.
But that would be it.
Do you remember that?
I mean,
the Bassmaster Classic, and they wanted to do a thing on they to your point, Ken, maybe it's the same exact thing, but I think we were doing a Bassmaster Classic somewhere, and laughingly they wanted to do a thing with Kevin cooking fish. Like it was a Kevin Van Dam, and it was going to be a cooking with Kevin and your bass fillet. And they're like, and we're like, whoa, no, this is going the wrong direction. And I remember us going, stop it, wait a minute. There's some powers that be ESPN days. These are the ESPN days, and they wanted to do a not just catch and release, but a catch and cooking segment of the Bassmaster Classic. And you're like, you can't cross that line. You can't.
Yeah, that's not.
You're imagine that back there. I take those fish with my daughter, and then I immediately go to the fillet station and fillet them up. It's like, come on,
yeah,
we're gonna eat them now.
I caught this one on a spinnerbait. He's gonna eat good.
Oh, so bad. It was so bad. I clearly remember that conversation. I had forgotten it until you brought it up, Ken, but I remember that being a laughably bad idea from somebody at ESPN. Laughably bad.
Amazingly bad. And that's one of the things, and I want to be fair to ESPN, but one of the things that pissed me off about ESPN's ownership of bass was they didn't respect the sport. And other evidence of that was when it came time to do a big event like the Bassmaster Classic, instead of identifying some people who were true subject matter experts, who they were employing at BASS or who they were promoting their career through the tournament trail, they would bring in Mark May, who was a 3-time Pro Bowler from the Washington Redskins or something like that, rather than anybody who actually had caught a fish or knew anything about the personalities involved. And that was maddening to me.
Yeah,
that pissed me off. But I will say this about him. Terry asked earlier if the Bass block of television shows was making money. ESPN was losing millions of dollars every year on BASS. Millions every year. Their problem was not that they weren't dedicating the resources. A lot of people were saying publicly, and Byron, I'm sure you remember this, a lot of fans were saying, oh, ESPN's not putting the investment in. They were absolutely investing, but they were investing really stupidly. Mm-hmm. And they were trying to make it NASCAR, and it's not that.
Right. Yep.
That's always been my take on it. And they never embraced the company BASS. There was a very much an us-them thing between the folks in Bristol who were, the clean, decent, right-thinking people and the unclean in Montgomery, Alabama or Celebration, Florida.
Right. Yeah, it was an interesting time. I mean, it was great to be on ESPN. It was great to do this show. I made a lot of friends. I had an amazing experience. Now I got some hats to remind me of it. It's funny we got on. I got a bunch of hats to remind me of my days out there. But it was really neat to go into that experience and to go off of that reality show and go right back into what you love passionately and be on television. It was nice to be able to talk passionately about what you love and not be in another world of television. It was authentic for me to get right back into fishing after that rose ceremony.
Terry, have I taken the show far enough away from Big Bass now?
My God,
we have, haven't we?
Sorry about that, guys.
there's no oxygen left.
Well, it's
No,
well,
I
it's
think
fascinating to
the
me.
old ESPN days are interesting. But yeah, no, we need to talk about some big fish, and we've got
We do.
people that have been asking questions that, Natty, where
Nathan,
are
what do
you?
we got?
All right,
My glasses
this
so I
is
can
Brown
read.
Bait Company. Byron, has your confidence in big bait selection changed much in the recent years compared to what it was a decade or two ago?
Is that? I wonder if that's Butch Brown. Brown
No, that's
Bait.
No.
Brendan Brown.
Brendan
Brendan Brown. He's a 6-year-old kid out of South Carolina.
He's an 18 or
he's a-
19-year-old young man who makes fabulous swim baits.
Phenomenal swim baits. I got
Does-
one here
really?
somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
he really
that one?
does.
Show me one, Terry.
Show him the packaging too, Terry.
Well, here's his packaging. I don't know. He must deal drugs or something on the side, but it
Oh,
comes in a
nice,
really
nice, Terry. Nice way to introduce a young man. Good job there.
really nice box. And that is
Oh, how cool! There you go.
bluegill wake bait.
Oh, I love it.
And show him the interior of the box if you would. Byron, this is cool. So Brendan Brown carves those baits and then packages them in the shavings that were
Oh.
part of the block of wood.
Oh, is that cool?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That- Awesome! I love that packaging.
Then he's got stickers.
Nice.
Yeah. He's pretty
He's
sharp.
he's
for
a
young
real
kid.
talent.
And he's 18.
Yeah.
18 or 19.
That's
Yeah.
super cool, man. That's a good looking bait, and that's awesome that he's carving them out of wood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He's
Cool
a good
stuff.
kid. His parents might be proud of him at some point.
yeah. Yeah, I've seen a real metamorphosis. And to answer his question, the swim baits, the finishes are so much better. Well, hell, look at the one he has. I mean, that's a perfect example right there. The finishes, what they were pretty prehistoric, a decade or two ago. And Terry, you know that as well as I do, that I was pulling those things out, and they didn't run very straight. They didn't work very straight. Yeah, we could break out our old ones like we did in the last show and be like laughing about the prehistoric baits we got, but they have changed dramatically. The finishes, the actions, obviously the hooks, adding more elements to it now for a higher hookup ratio. Even simple things like doing a double split ring, so you get more than of a 360 rotation. All of this stuff has really advanced. There you go. AC, Alan Cole, baby.
This is actually a Z plug.
Oh, is it? Looks like Alan Cole. Oh,
Yeah.
So
Well,
Greg
everybody
Silks
was copying
instead?
Alan back in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
We had
yeah,
Alan on our show not long ago.
it was
He was terrific.
this is state of the art paint back then, and it looks like crap compared to the
That's
stuff that's
to his point right there. The finishes we have on those old baits are comical. And and I got a lot of the old True Tungstens I got and all that stuff from back in the day. They're molded really bad, finished baits. And so yes, it's changed a lot. And for the better. All the finishes look better, the actions are better, the technology is better. I think some guys have a hook that, this is just from a practical standpoint. Having either a hook that's going to swivel within the body, or like I said, the double split ring, just things that make it a more effective swim bait. It's through necessity is the mother of invention, and truly in swim baits, if people realized there was a necessity to change things from what Terry, you and I have a bumper crop full of now, which are just antiques, antique swim baits that are cool for display, but I wouldn't throw them anymore. I would throw them because they're just antiquated.
You talk about the split ring, double split rings to help in the rotation and not give the bass extra leverage. Did you ever get into those braided line in the place of a split ring? Did you ever get into that stuff?
I actually Googled YouTube that because I'm struggling with I like throwing spy baits, but that's a low percentage bait. So that was something I was throwing at the U.S. Open. It was a spy bait sometimes, and that is, again, those fish, smallmouth especially, throw that bait a lot. So a friend of mine, Rod Lee, suggested that I start using, to that point, braided split rings for the same exact reason, Ken. And tying a braided split ring just like a double split ring, or having a bait. A lot of the hard baits have a rotating hook in the body
Yeah.
of the bait. But that's another great one, Ken. And funny you mention it, because just for this year's U.S. Open, I was tying those braided split rings.
Did you have enough experience with them now to know whether you like them, don't like them? It's a lot of trouble, it seems.
It's a lot.
It's
It's
a
pretty
pain in
hard
the
to time. Yeah, it's frustrating to tie them. So it's a lot of work. I haven't had enough experience to see if they're effective now. I haven't been on such a good bite to where I can see if it made a big difference yet.
Gotcha. Good.
Not sure.
Nathan, we got any more good questions out there? I know we're loading up on questions.
Hey, stop! My dogs are fighting over here. So I gotta break up the dogs. Stop!
Aaron Smith.
Stop.
What makes you love swim bait fishing versus other techniques?
Oh man, I think it's because I was doing it when nobody was, for starters. So I shouldn't say no one, but I was there was a small group of us that were doing it.
Yeah.
And it's, man, when you fool a fish to eat those big baits, that strike is so vicious, and the bite is usually so hard, and it's addictive because it's such a hard thud. When those fish really want to kill that bait, they knock the rod out of your hand. And for a bass to hit a bait that hard, and it takes a lot to throw them, which I like. You don't get a lot of bites at them. I like knowing that I have this cadence that I can comfortably throw it and fish it around people that aren't catching them. So I feel like you can master it, and I like fishing other things. Don't get me wrong. I love fishing all these other things and catching fish on other techniques. But there's something to be, if I could just, when I go out of a tournament, a lot of these tournaments down here are like a 3-fish tournament or a 1-day tournament. Man, if you just get 2 or 3 bites on that swim bait, you're going to probably win, And so you're like, I could go out and throw a jig, and I can go out and throw a crankbait, and I can go out and catch a limit like everybody else. And I can maybe hope for a 3-pounder or 4-pounder or do a lot of culling, or I could go out and throw that swim bait and mix it up with other things. I mean, make sure I catch 2, 3, 4 fish, but especially here in Texas, they have these 3-fish tournaments. I'm like, man, if there's even a remote chance of a swim bait bite, I might just need 2 to win. I just need 2 bites the whole day to win that tournament. Versus in a 3-fish tournament, you go out and you catch 3 2-pounders, you got 6 pounds. Congratulations. Everybody else has 6 pounds. I go out and get 2 bites. I have 12 pounds.
Yeah.
I win with 2 bites. So that's where I think I'm almost culling through a lot of small fish with the swim bait. And that's
without having to call.
I'm calling through a lot of swim. Yeah, exactly. I'm calling through a lot of fish without having to cull, and I'm not getting caught up in going up by ounces and getting an extra quarter pound, to my bag. I just want to get 3 big bites and knock it out of the park. And it's a home run hitter thing, man. It really is, but I love it. And I feel like I'm very good at it because I've been doing it for so long, and I can do it all day long, and I get sore. My muscles, even though I'm close to 60, I can still go throw a swim bait all day long. And, when I go get massages, they're like, man, you got some really weird muscle thing going on in your back. I'm like laughing because I know my shoulders and my back and my neck are all jacked from 30 years of swim bait fishing. It's got weird bumps. I got weird bumps back there like Quasimodo, where I've built muscles back there that have me almost hunched over in bad posture because I've thrown so many big baits for so long. But I don't get tired throwing them. I don't get tired throwing swim baits.
For a guy who's relatively new to the big swim bait approach, how do you get over that hurdle? Everybody talks about you got to stick with it, throw it all day, that kind of thing, especially if you're targeting big fish. How do you get over that mental hurdle to put yourself in the right frame of mind?
I had that question asked a lot in seminars, and I always tell people the best thing you can do is go out and throw it at the prime times, which is not the crack of dawn early, but mostly in the early mornings and the afternoons, and especially in the later afternoons, because the bite really gets good a lot of times when we're usually weighing in, especially a swim bait bite, and I can tell you that I usually put a swim bait down around 10 o'clock and pick it back up. I think we talked about that the last show we did.
You told us a great story about Kevin Van Dam not having the right idea about timing.
Overcast. He was, remember Kevin?
Yeah, that's right.
Overcast at Amistad. He goes, they're going to kill that swim bait today. And I'm like, I didn't want to tell Kevin Van Dam he doesn't have any experience in this matter. Kevin, I love you, and they are not going to eat that bait today. And I'm a swim bait guy. So you go knock him out, Kevin. Let me know how that works for you. So yes, overcast. Do not go throw it. I mean, just don't throw it. It's a visual bait. It's a sun bait. Have the right water clarity. Know the optimum conditions, and you got to just work on it. As far as now you could just be online looking at all the information. I probably should do some stuff on swim baits, you know, out there online, just authentic and genuine from everything I know, because there's a lot of misinformation. Unfortunately, I see a lot of stuff on there, and I'm like, man, that's not accurate or right, you know. And I wouldn't. All my years of doing that, I wouldn't do what that person's saying. You know, maybe it works for them here or there, but you know, the bandwidth of time that I've been doing it, I can tell you, there's those key things. And I think if they watch the last show, they really get a feel for, you know, the right time to throw it, the right water clarity, you know, the right sun conditions, all that stuff.
The last time you shared with us your combo for throwing the big baits and stuff like that, if you're an angler who's very fortunate, and I realize you're using a lot of gear you've just been comfortable with using it for years because you're dialed in with it. But if you were to put together a kind of a money is no object rod reel line for throwing some of the bigger stuff, the multi-ounce stuff, what would you be looking at?
Well, from a rod standpoint, you know, Trika is coming out with a swim bait rod, but I told Trika, I said, we can't do a swim bait rod because there's 3-inch swim baits and there's 13-inch swim baits. So we got to have 3 of them, you know, and we got to have them that match that size. And years ago, Terry, Rogue Rods, remember last time he ran off and
right
got
over
it.
there.
There it is. He's got it out this time. It's his favorite rod, but he had to dig deep to find it. So
I was at the bottom of my freaking broad locker.
We were getting so much grief about that. But Rogue did this, and it's a 3 bait rod series. So you have 3 rods that cover the whole scope of swim baits, from very small or smaller up to very, very large, and the complement them. As far as reels go, I'm always looking for a really good quality reel with a big spool that carries with a 6:3 to 1 gear ratio. You know, and again, it's the great reels that you can, you know, pick up. You know, now there's a whole bunch of them out there. You know, Trika's developing one, so again, I'm excited about everything Trika's doing. Yep.
But let's talk about spool size, because everybody that I talk to tells me, oh, you don't need a 300 size reel or a 400 size reel. Bull crap, you do. You can't use a 150, maybe a 200 with a, you know, a swim bait that I don't even consider a swim bait. It's a sassy shad.
Right.
You know, but if you're throwing a 6-inch Huddleston or a bigger, a 300 size reel or bigger is really better. Can you tell people why?
I agree with that, because that spool is so much, the line you're using is, you know, the heavy line you're using, and that spool, that line coming off that spool, and that big reel complements it so much more, and it allows that big line to peel off better. You're not going to get the backlashes. You're not going to cut your line. You know, you're usually using a monofilament or a fluorocarbon. I don't like to use braid. I just don't. You know, I'm going to use the big mono because it's so abrasion resistant. And monofilament and big heavy 20, 25 pound fluoro, to your point, Terry, you gotta, and this is going back to our saltwater days. You know, that it's such an easier reel to cast and control that big spool.
The diameter, and when you're making the cast, the diameter of the spool doesn't change as much as if you have a small diameter spool. And that's what people don't realize, is that as you make that cast with a small diameter spool, that spool can go down half of its diameter.
Right.
And now your gear ratio's changed.
Your gear ratio has totally changed.
Or inches per turn of the handle, it's completely changed.
Exactly. And that's another thing they don't know, is that you when you empty a spool, you don't have the exact same, you don't have anywhere near the gear ratio you had when it was full. And those little narrow spools do that. So that big spool, everything stays balanced. And to your point, Terry, it's just better to have a balanced, and like you said, these are the bigger baits, but the bigger baits require that beefier reel. And there's several out there.
Would your go-to be a 300 size or a 400 size?
300.
For some of the 300? Okay. And that seems to be, you know, it wasn't that many years ago. I don't remember 300 size reels. You know, there was a 200, there was a 400. And there weren't a lot.
What about you, Terry? Are you 300 or 400? I mean, what would you go with?
I have both. I mean, I have old Shimano Conquest that I got from Japan back in 2001, 2002, 2003. And then I have 3 Conquest 400s.
Okay.
So, I mean, I use both of them. If I'm throwing a 12-inch swim bait, I'm using a 400.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it just like you said, it goes back to throwing iron on the boats.
Right.
It just it's almost the size of a squitter, right? I
Right.
mean,
Yeah, exactly. The old squitters. So and that's key. The heavy line is key. The bait, the rod needs to complement that. You don't want too stiff of a rod. A broomstick is not the way to go. When I was at ICAST this year, I was looking at some of the new swim bait sticks that came out, and they're just broomsticks. You know, they don't have that. You got to have that give, because that fish is going to hit so hard. You need to have that shock absorber element to it, and there's a fine line between that. And so you don't just make a big heavy rod, 7, 11, 8 foot, and say, there's our swim bait rod. That's not how it works. And you've seen that, Terry. So many of these swim bait rods are poor. I mean, they're great quality products, but the action is just useless. It puts too much strain on you when it doesn't even load up when you cast it. It probably wears you out throwing it, because it's such a stiff, heavy rod, and there's something to be said about having a rod that matches it, because it makes you able to fish the bait longer.
Yep. And make a longer cast.
True. And most importantly, absorb the strike. You know,
Right.
Have a high hookup ratio. You remember the old day with the old lipless crankbaits? There was always a dance to find the perfect the rattle trap rod. You know, the perfect glass rod, whatever glass rod or whatever rod you could throw that would be able to be just your perfect lipless crankbait rod. And swim baits are so much like that on a much more bigger scale.
Yep. So we got another question from Jacob Collins. What type and or style of swim bait would you recommend throwing in 45-degree water?
An ice jig.
There you go. Now you're talking.
Yeah, that's dig a hole. For me, that's dig a hole. I have a hard time, throwing a swim bait in cold water, because it becomes that's when jerk baits are great. That's when something that's just almost static and sitting still. And I don't know. I haven't had that much experience fishing 45-degree water with a swim bait. And normally I won't. I remember when it gets below 56, 55, I'm like, okay, it's the bait has to probably be a lot slower, and it would have to be a glide bait, maybe a suspended. If I had a fish one, if someone said you're going to throw that, it'd be a suspending glide bait, but it would really, really slow, because again, that's where the suspending jerk bait. The power of that cold water is the pause. And the bait just kind of sits there and hovers. And the old days when you're throwing a jerk bait, it just sits there, slow sinking or suspending. And again, if I was going to do it with a swim bait, it would be a smaller glide bait, and it would, have that pause element to it.
I realize that there are adjustments that you're making throughout the day anytime you're on the water, Byron, but what would be kind of your default glide bait retrieve on a day like a lot of us might encounter today, where the water temperature is still in the high 50s maybe, and it's a nice sunny day, you got plenty of water clarity, you got 4 or 5 feet of water clarity? Is there a default retrieve for Byron Velvick?
Yeah, and it's usually I err in those conditions right there, Ken. Slower is better, and I like to slow it down. I like to get that big wide wobble to it. I mean, the big wide, big wide turns to it. And again, I'll weight the thing. The Livingston one has a weight system built into it. So like the old True Tungsten days, where you can pull the pin and you can change the weight. So you can change the weight of a Livingston glide bait internally, so that you can make it match that water temperature, so it will suspend. Some of my friends are using the Livingstons and they're putting tungsten in them. So they're taking the lead ball. It comes with lead balls in it, but you just pull the pin, take the lead balls out, stick tungsten in there, and now the thing will actually sink or suspend way better, depending on how many balls you have in there. And it's nice to have a bait, a glide bait, where I can adjust that weight for that exact situation. So it's not floating real high, it's not sinking real fast, but it's complementing that water temperature. And that buoyancy changes with degree of temperature, as you know. So if that water is 48 degrees versus 54 degrees, there's a difference in the shift of weight you have to put in it. And a lot of people, they say suspending. I'm like, well, suspending at 65 and suspending at 50, temperature? Totally different. You can't have the bait ain't going to suspend at 65 and 50. If it's 50, it's going to sink like a rock, but it's so you have to dance with that. And Ken, to that point, in those colder days, I want that glide bait I want to reel it real slow. I want to feel that thump in the rod. I want to feel that action going back and forth, that single joint going back and forth. But if I pause it or I have it turn around on itself, a lot of everybody gets a kick out of turning it around, doing the Crazy Ivan. Remember I told you about that? Crazy Ivan from the movie, where that submarine turns around on itself to see if there's somebody following it. Well, when I pop that glide bait and it turns back around and looks back at the fish that's following it, I don't want it to float up real fast or sink real fast, or maybe I do want it to sink a little bit, but I want it to be a very, very neutral buoyancy balance. And that comes with me adding or subtracting weight, which I do on the Livingston.
That old True Tungsten bluegill glide bait that they made, which was, I don't know, one of the early bluegill style glide baits I remember. And it had, as you say, you remove the pin that held the two pieces together, and you could get at the little weighted balls. If you took them all out, it stayed on the surface. And if you went with a maximum of 3, it would sink pretty quick. Was that a bait that you had a hand in designing, or was that a bait that you really liked a lot? Because I've still got 4 or 5 of them.
Yeah, I was sponsored by True Tungsten, and so I was sponsored with them at that time, and we talked about all that. So when Livingston said make the perfect swim bait, that was one of the factors. I said we need to bring that back. We need to bring that exact thing back, because I thought that was brilliant. I thought it was a great, because it's a durable bait, but how many baits can you change the weight on? And so with True Tungsten, I was sponsored by them at that time. I was their Matt Newman and I, we were all together on that, and so we were the swim bait guys for True Tungsten, and when they went out of business, I thought that bait you're talking about in tilapia pattern at Amistad was a killer. I mean, an absolute killer. It was that perch body, and I got them in the eBay room right over there. I can go grab one, but I have the exact same thing. I have the True Tungsten baits, and the long one, the big mullet looking one. They had a long elongated, like an 8-inch one, and they had the bluegill crappie tilapia body one, and all of them had the pin that removed and the weight you would change, just like the new Livingston glide baits.
What an innovative company, and it's a shame they couldn't make it. They had a lot of internal problems, let's say, and they didn't make it, unfortunately. Those of us who work with those guys.
Party town. Party USA.
Oh yeah. Jim Flandreau.
One of the they were making, put it that way.
Yeah, they knew how to enjoy themselves.
They did.
But yeah, they were the first company to come out with the tungsten sinkers that I can remember. And those things were just revolutionary. Most of the tungsten stinkers I have to this day are True Tungsten.
They're still true
that I got 20 years ago.
Yep. Hey, you want me to sell those on eBay? Byron's Bunker could use those. I need the next Brody of the Lake.
I need them too.
I do. I got Brody and I are friends, but I got to go out there and say, Brody, I'm going to start selling all of Ken Duke's stuff, because Ken Duke, you have massive amounts of stuff they need to sell, just like I do.
I got some stuff.
Oh my God,
some stuff.
How much money is out?
He barely walked through his garage because he's got so much crap in there.
Yeah,
I got some
junk. Thing on Byron's Bunker, what I love about having an eBay store is that I put something on there and somebody pops up and says, "Oh my God, where did you get that?" And it's still new. Like I got the True Tungsten frogs, and I got a guy going, "Dude, that's the greatest freaking frog in the world, the True Tungsten frog." And I'm like, Mad Max. I got him over there. It's called the Mad Max frog, and they're like, and guys are like, dude, I love that frog. I'll take all that you got. Like, how many more of those do you got? I get that all the time when I list something, and they're like, how do you still have those new in a package? Like, what tackle store did you find? And I'm like, no, they're in my garage. I just got boxes of this stuff. And they're like, how many more? Because I'll just take them all right now. The Mans -1s, the Mans. I was with Mans. I had a whole bunch of Mans -1s. They're like, oh my gosh, the -1s are the loudmouth. I put the loudmouth out there, and the Mans loudmouth baits. And the guy goes, I catch all my fish on these baits. They don't make them anymore. I miss them. Can you send me all that you got? I'll just corner the market on them. Shoot me a price. And that's really cool.
Mans is actually becoming a collector's item now.
Really?
Oh, yeah. So there's guys that's all they do is concentrate on their minus series baits.
Yeah.
You might want to.
I had so many of those to sell. I probably got a whole bunch more at the lake house. So what I do is whenever I go to the lake house, I go in the garage and I find these boxes. I go, oh, that'd be good to sell. And I bring it back here and I'll put it on eBay. And it's neat to talk to the people because they get a kick out of telling you when you start a rapport with the people that are the customers at eBay, because about these old baits, just like we are, you know, and,
Mhm.
and hopefully forward-facing sonar doesn't kill all that. I'm afraid it might. Suddenly no one's fishing that stuff anymore, but it's so cool.
Uh,
It's gonna, as much as I think forward-facing sonar is changing the game at the highest competitive level, I don't want us or the angling public generally to overestimate the number of those units that are actually in the marketplace. Everybody does not have it. Only a small percentage of the angling public has that stuff. And yeah, you're going to see them if you go to the U.S. Open or if you're on the Elite Series or on the Bass Pro Tour. But by and large, you're not running into that many people who have it out
Yep.
there. That'll change as the technology gets better and the prices come down. But right now, yeah, it's I hope forward facing doesn't change things that much, because I'm with you guys that I don't want it to take away the mystique of fishing and of a great cast into tight cover
Well,
or a
what's
skip under a
killing
boat dock.
Zona? I talked to Zona about it, and what's killing it is the viewership. It's boring to watch fishing tournaments anymore, and I hear that all the time on the chat rooms. But it's true that I don't get to watch Gene Rojas or Fred Urbanez way up the river throwing a frog anymore. You know, I don't get to watch. I don't get to see the excitement of the camera guys zeroing in on somebody that's, you know, still fishing, hoping to get a bite. You know, and them talking to the camera guy, and the camera and the guy are looking at them. You know, when I was at Kentucky Lake, throwing that Carolina rig out there, and I was in the top 10, it was like every time I got bit, I'd pull the rod right towards the camera guy, and I'd have the rod right at him, and I go, are you ready? And he kind of nodded his head, and I'd reel down, and I'd set the hook. I mean, that was so much fun. And the camera guy goes, "This is awesome television." Like you're out there on those shell beds, and you're taking the rod and you're pointing it right at the camera guy because he's in the back of the boat. And you just dial it in, you point it right at him. And you go, "See that?" And the rod goes like that, and I go, "Here we go." And all of a sudden, reel down, you go whack, and there's like another 5 or 6 or 7 pounder, and the camera guy's high fiving. He goes, "Dude, we're making great TV." Those days anymore, man. Those are my memories of making great television. Because if you have a big personality and you have a great bite going on, you got a camera guy in the boat, man, make some awesome TV. And that's not happening with forward facing sonar. I watched all the tournaments before the US Open because I was trying to learn, and I could see what Zona said. It's horrible for viewership. Just horrible for viewership.
Yeah, that's a great point you make.
They got to figure out a way to get the screen on the TV.
Well, they were doing that. Okay, so they're doing that.
Working on that.
Some of the guys, not a lot of guys are too secretive, but some of the guys on the Elite Tour were, and I have it on mine, where the screen's on the back, you know, and they didn't televise the U.S. Open, but my co-angler, I could tell my guy fishing with me I go, "Hey, look, you know, you can see the video game going on, you know, but it's not nearly as exciting as to that point watching a bunch of guys get bit on frogs or flipping or pitching, or, you know, the tools exploding, the grass is exploding. They set the hook and a 9-pounder comes out of a clump of tules and grass and wood. You know, that's great television, man. That's just, ooh, I mean, that was awesome to see it.
Yeah. And right there in your home state, Byron, of Texas, you got guys like Josh Jones who have been wildly successful at catching big fish at places like Fork or OH Ivy, and they're charging top dollar for their guide clients, sometimes more than $1,000 a day or $1,500 a day, and they're making 6 or 8 casts a day.
Yep.
That's mind blowing to me.
In 5 years, nobody's going to be able to cast anymore.
Yep. Yeah.
At least accurately.
You know? Accurate casting is going to be out the door. You know, and again, it's. I hope Rick's right, and I hope these fish quickly get desensitized or wise up to it. I hope that it's going to become less and less effective. That's all you can really hope for, is that it's not the monster that it is now. When the Alabama rig first came out, it was unbelievable, you know, and it slowly got harder and harder to catch them on an Alabama rig. It's just another bait now, but it wasn't the, oh my gosh. And the swim baits too. You know, when I was throwing swim baits in the early days, like I told you guys last time, they'll eat them off the side of your boat. You know, they'll come up and they'll chase it to the boat, and they'll literally hit your boat to eat the swim bait. You know, those days are gone too. So they've wised up to the swim bait. They've wised up to the Alabama rig. I hope they also wise up to the electronics, you know, and the forward facing sonar, it's still going to be a tool. It's going to help you see stuff, but it's not going to be the monster that it is right now, you know, and that's where Rick's, like said, it's probably too early, I don't think it's going to decimate all the fisheries. I don't think, there's some people on the internet that are saying it's killing all the fisheries. It's just destroying everything. It's it's the scourge. And I think the fish are probably a little more advanced than that. I think that they're going to be wise to it. At least I hope.
One of my favorite questions since the serious development of forward-facing sonar, Byron, how many times would we have broken the world record in California if there had been forward-facing sonar in the 80s and 90s?
Oh my gosh! Oh wow, that's a great question, and it's so true. Wow.
If you had the swim baits that we had and forward-facing sonar, holy crap!
Oh yeah,
it would have been
down on those little ponds, those little lakes in San Diego and little Southern California lakes where those giants were at. That F1, that F1 Florida strain bass that was just monstrous, growing to insane numbers, 23, 24, 25 pounds. Gone now. But that first hatchling of those big giant Florida strains that were down there, and when I went out here to Bernie Lake, it was with my buddy Clendon, and he was teaching me, trying to show me about forward-facing sonar before the U.S. Open, and he's like, "Dude, look at that catfish," and they got giant catfish in there, and he goes, "That's the biggest fish I've ever seen on forward-facing sonar," and there's this 4 or 5 foot catfish down there in these rocks, and it looked like the Loch Ness monster, and he's like, "Look at that," and he kept saying, "Look at that." And I'm still trying to figure out what I'm looking at. He goes, "That is one single giant big fish. That's a 4 foot catfish down there." We're looking at it together, but Clendon's like, "Dude, that's the biggest fish I've ever seen." And it was right here on the lake, right by my house here, that's known for having giant trolling motor only lake. And there's these giant catfish down there. And I'm like, how cool is it if I would have just had a big chunk of liver or chicken? I could have just pitched it at that 4 foot glob. And we're following it around. There's a 4 foot glob out there. We didn't have a big liver chicken wing, and put it on a hook and pitch out there and just watch that 4 foot, 5 foot glob eat that chicken wing. To your point, it would have been like catching the world record bass. I could have caught a massive.
That's very cool.
Yeah, that would have. I want to go back, and do that again, because it's like I'll just go chase giant 4 foot Loch Ness monster looking things around out there on it.
Here in Florida, a lot of the guys with forward facing get a kick out of spotting an alligator.
Oh my gosh! I never thought of that. Yes, yes, that'd be cool.
That's got to be crazy.
Yeah,
it's pretty funny. It's actually pretty funny, and which brings me to a weird story that I'll just tell it only because I think it's funny. I was out with Justin Hamner, who's an Elite Series pro, qualified for the 2024 Classic, I think. Justin Hamner is a really great young man. Thoroughly enjoyed my time with him. I got in the boat with him, and he knew I had been with BASS years earlier, and all he wanted to do was listen to me tell stories about Aaron Martins and Byron Velvick and Skeet Reese and all these guys he admired coming up. And so I'm telling stories and stuff like that. But meanwhile, he's throwing a spook and looking at the fish underneath his spook using his forward-facing sonar.
Wow.
Holy crap. And
we're fishing along. He's catching some fish. We're fishing along, and I see an alligator coming toward his bait. It's not a huge alligator. It's a 6 or 7 foot alligator. This is at Grosse Savon in Louisiana, which if you've never been there, I highly recommend it. He's fishing the spook, and there's this alligator swimming over to his bait, very leisurely because it's a little bait, and it's just walking along slowly. And I'm thinking, should I tell him there's an alligator stalking his bait? No.
Wait, is he looking at forward-facing sonar, so he's not seeing it?
Yeah.
He's
not seeing. He doesn't see his bait. He's looking at the screen, and he's knowing what his bait's doing because he's fished a spook for 100 miles, even though he's a young guy. And the alligator I'm thinking, I'm not going to tell him there's an alligator. Surely he knows there's an alligator. The alligator just swam right over and grabbed it. And I said, Justin.
He's still looking at the forward-facing sonar.
He's waiting to see the strike on the screen.
Right.
And ignores the alligator that swam up to the bait and ate it.
It's like a kid with their phone.
Yeah.
That's
the sad part, Terry. And to your point, when we fish, we get to see the osprey, you look up, you're looking at all this nature, right? That's what we do as fishers. And it's not happening anymore. These guys are looking down at that screen the whole time. And God, that's a great story, Ken. I'm going to tell that a lot because, I used to go catch alligators. I know you're not supposed to, but in Alabama, I was thrilled at Eufaula. They eat a frog really good, and it's so much fun to hook them. I mean, you just go, there's alligators everywhere, right? And it's like a little marshmallow. You throw a white frog out there, and they swim up to it. And the coolest thing is when they just go, boom, and they just chomp on it, and then you go whack, and it looks like a jet ski did a circle out there. This giant alligator goes nuts. And I mean, I'm a California kid. I'm like, I get to catch alligators in Alabama. And I mean, there's lots of them, and they love white frogs. So I didn't realize it was illegal. I didn't realize you weren't supposed to do it, but I was doing it. And I was just hooking these giant alligators, having a blast, and you're enjoying nature. You're seeing osprey, you're seeing owls, you're seeing the coolest things, you're seeing bald eagles, you're watching beavers and all that stuff. And all that, to that point, Ken, he doesn't even watch a alligator go eat his bait while he's fishing it.
It's more than that, though. I mean, you know, you would notice that the grebes were diving.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when the grebes were diving, you knew there was bait in the area. You knew that something was active. You saw the cows on the shoreline that were laying down. You knew something. You know, there's nothing, no activity.
Right.
You know, seagulls diving.
Yep.
You know, a change in the wind direction. If you're glued into your phone or a forward-facing sonar unit, are you going to notice all those?
You're not going to see the shad running up against the bank. You're not going to see a school of shad getting popped along the bank. You know, unless you hear the blow up, you're busy looking at your forward-facing sonar, and you're missing the swirls
Mm-hmm.
of a school of shad that's being pushed up against a boat dock or a stump, and all that's being missed now. And that's sad, man. These kids are missing what we love. I loved fishing because I made a living in nature. You know, I had the best office in the world, and that was every lake and river and stream that they took us to fish a tournament. And now, you know, these kids are just putting their electronics on. Yeah, and I told Rick about that. There's guys here in Texas, these kids, when their forward-facing sonar doesn't work, they just put it on a trailer and go home. They don't even fish. They stop fishing the minute their forward-facing sonar is not working. And that's a known problem, that if their electronics aren't working, they might as well go home. You know, they're like, there's no fishing. They won't even go fishing during the day. And I mean, several tournaments where I'm like, oh yeah, some guys had problems with electronics. They just went home. They won't even fish.
Amazing and horrific.
I mean, you go to the lake and you're in a tournament, and then because your electronics don't work, you just say, I'm done. I mean, maybe you are because of the stats. In reality, our sad part is if you're maybe they're right, but at the same time, dude, you're at the tournament and you paid your entry. If you get out on the water, don't just quit because your electronics don't work. I mean, that's a sad situation.
Wow.
But anyway,
unbelievable.
So much for Debbie.
All right, Byron Velvick, tell us a story about a big fish. Doesn't have to be the biggest fish you ever hooked, but a big fish that got away from you that haunts you to this day.
Oh yeah, I got. That's a great question, and boy, there's a lot of them, but I can remember clearly. This is my early days. It was Lake Mead, and this was a fish that would have easily won me the tournament. And I remember I hooked it on a topwater. It was on a popper in the jip beds, and this is back when you're starving. This is back when you need to win a boat to keep going. And I think you guys remember the joke was I used to go pick up golf balls. Everybody was a golf ball.
Yeah.
So I was always having to jump in the lakes and pick up golf balls at night in order to supplement my income because I made more money doing that than anything else. But still, I had to put on a wetsuit. I had to sneak into a golf course, and I had to pick up thousands of golf balls. Well, I hated golf balling. So every time I could win a tournament, I didn't have to freaking golf ball for a long, long time if I could win a tournament. Well, Lake Mead, this one tournament, I was in the top 3 or 4 or 5 the first day. I was way up there. And the second day I had a good limit. I knew I was a kicker away, and it was the afternoon, and it was on a topwater, and it was a really great bite because you could just run every pocket, and they were eating this popper. You had to throw it to the very back of the pocket, pop it one time, and just wait. That was the cadence, man. It was unbelievably predictable where you could just throw it out there. And again, this is the beauty of before forward-facing sonar. You just ran every single pocket at the lake. You threw as far as you could down the middle of the gut. You popped it one time and you waited. And you just popped again. If it was moving fast, forget it. But if it just popped and just sat there and was dead sticking, they just smoke it. So I was on this great pattern, and it was doing me well. And I was solid. I knew I was one big fish away. And I hooked her in the jip beds, and she was probably 5, which is a huge fish, close to 5 at Mead. I already had a good limit. And I remember I had a pro's wife in the boat with me. She was a darn good fisherman. And she was excited because she knew that was the fish to win. I knew it was the fish to win. And I fought that fish all the way up, and she had the net out. And I was already cashing the check. I was already selling the boat. You know, I already knew which boat it was. In my head, I'm like,
Yeah.
I've won. Like, I know this is it, and it's done. And that fish is coming to the boat, and I'm just kind of pulling it along, and literally she had the net out, and then all of a sudden it just popped. You know, the hook just popped, and the fish kept coming by the amount of torque I had on it. The fish was dead. It was not dead. It was just tired and laid up. And she's reaching as far as she can, and the fish misses the rim of the net and goes under the net. But it doesn't even have its strength anymore because I had fought it for so long. And I'm watching a $45,000, $50,000 fish just very slowly, all in slow motion, just kind of regain its strength and kind of right itself, and then just slowly swim down. And she's got the net there, and she's holding the net on, and I'm just like, oh, I mean, the few of those, I think the most painful fish I can remember losing, they were all boat fish, I call them, because that was a fish that was a boat.
Yeah.
And it was a win, and it was a total year maker. It kept me out of the lake picking up golf balls. You know, that was it. I was not a golf ball for 6 months because of that fish. And that fish had me in a very relaxed state. And that was, thanks for asking that question. It's a great question. And that I have 5 or 6 of those particular fish that in different places where they were bed fish that I sat on forever trying to get them to bite, knowing they were boat fish. You know, you've done your job. You found the fish to win. You know, whether it's that topwater fish was a painful one because it was at the net and it unhooked at the net, and it was just a flick of the hook. You saw the hook pop out. It was all in slow motion. But those boat fish in the early days were the tough pill to swallow because you knew how close you were to winning yet another boat. Yeah, those were the tough ones. Great question.
The biggest fish that you've ever lost?
The biggest fish I ever lost, it was the one I didn't see it. I mean, I can tell you what you mean. The one that I hooked.
No, the one that you've seen. The biggest one that you've seen that you.
Oh, the biggest one I've seen that I lost. That would have to be at Clear Lake, and I don't know how big it was. It was giant. It was really big. And I remember that was in the early days of swim bait. I think I told you guys the story, about those swim bait days and how we were hooking those giants. They're like seals out there. And it was after I won Clear Lake, but I was still fishing Clear Lake with swim baits. And Aaron and I both, I remember Aaron swore he saw the world record, what he thought was the world record right by Lakeport. And I saw one around Anderson Island. These are both places at Clear Lake where these things are just behemoths, giants. And in that same area, where the eyes are bugged out and it's the biggest fish she ever saw. And I hooked one on a swim bait on a Thule line. And when I saw her come up, I was like, my biggest fish is 1486. And that fish was bigger than that, but I don't know how big it was, but it was bigger than anything I'd ever seen. And I'm not saying it was a world record, but Aaron and I both saw what we thought were 20 pluses. I saw one that I thought was over 20 at Clear Lake. And it was crazy to pull up to. I was bed fishing, and I'll tell you the story on that one because that one I went the first day of the tournament with Don Ivino's son. I started there, and I said I'm starting on a spot where I saw the biggest fish in my life ever, and I'm shaking. I'm so excited, but we're starting fishing at a place where yesterday I saw the biggest fish of my entire life, and I remember pulling up to the Thule line because I was looking for bedfish because it was springtime, and as I approached the Thule line, put my trolling motor down, and moving up to the Thule line. I'm seeing what I thought was a big giant carp out there suspended, sunning themselves, because it's cold early spring, and she's got her eggs. And so she's up near the surface and she's just sitting there, and I'm coming up to it. I'm looking at it like a carp. And all of a sudden I see her start to turn sideways, and I realize it's a bass, but it's like that wide and that long, it's just this. And the eyeball is what you remember, remember the eyeball. Because it's like orca, it's sticking way out. It's a big, giant, bulged out eye. And she looks over at you and she just slowly turns and starts to go down. You're like, that is not possible to be a bass. It's too big. But it's the colors are right. But it's like a giant grass carp painted like a bass. That's what your mind is trying to process it as being a bass. And I remember Aaron at the time, I said, dude, I saw a fish that I swear to God was 28, high teens to low 20s, I'm guessing. But those were my biggest fish I ever saw and the biggest fish I ever lost were both in that same area. And it was just a swim bait fish that killed me, kicked my butt, tore me apart. The one I hooked at Amistad, I never saw it. That fish literally took me to my knees It's hard to believe.
Wow.
It literally takes you down, pitching braid. Yeah, that wasn't a swim bait, guys. This was amazing, right? I'm pitching, trees, and I think that fish was at the bottom of a tree under a big stump. And when he went that way, it was like a pulley system, It pulled me straight down for him. Because it just goes, and it just starts pulling straight down. You got heavy 65-pound braid and a big, giant, heavy-duty jig. And it literally, that fish took off that way as fast as he could, but he literally pulled you almost in the water. And this is going back to saltwater days. It was like hooking a calico bass under an oil derrick. It was like that. It was literally hooking a calico bass that you could not control. And those were great memories when you hook those fish that you just can't even begin to turn. Just don't even.
Right.
Know. Yeah.
So there's another question from Patrick Veltman. How many 10-pound bass have you landed?
How many 10s have I landed? I'm not, because I fish tournaments. I haven't caught a bazillion of them, but let's see. I would have to say probably 8 or 10, if I was to guess, 8 or 10, I've never been like a big bass super guru where I go out and just fish for big bass. In tournaments, you just don't get a lot of them,
Yeah.
So yeah, I've caught, my I can think of 14s of Paris, so it would be probably no more than 10, I would guess.
A 1480, was it 1486 you said is your personal best?
Yeah, Louisiana.
That's a monster. I mean,
that was a
Out
monster.
of Louisiana.
Caney Lake, Louisiana, where the lake record was all the time, right?
Yeah, the state record. The state record is out of there.
Yeah, the state record in Louisiana. And I thought it was the state record. And the state record was 15 and a half. And I thought, and the deal was Louisiana had a deal where if you caught it and you photographed it and measured it and released it, they would send you a replica. So here I am from California. Well, I guess that only applies to Louisiana residents because I never got them. And I'm like, Louisiana, he still owes me a 1486 mount because I went there. I took pictures of it. I showed it to everybody. We documented it. I went and released it. And to this day, I've never gotten my Louisiana 1486 mount that they promised me.
Come on, Louisiana.
Come on, Louisiana. I filled out all the paperwork. I thought it was a state record when I found it on a bed. And then I called my buddy because I was on a guide trip. I told my buddy on the guide trip, I said, we're done. I took the customer in and dropped him off and called my buddy to come down and help me try to catch it. And then I caught it that evening and took it in. That was a neat fish.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's a
1486 on a bed. That was pretty cool.
On a bed. Oh my
on a
gosh.
bed. Yeah, on a bed.
That's cool.
Yep.
We got David Jong's got a question for you. During your West Coast days, did you have a rivalry with anybody?
Ooh,
that's great. I like that question.
That is.
Yeah.
You know who we really butted heads a lot was me and Dean Rojas. A lot.
Really?
Dean Rojas and I butted heads a lot. I did not like Dean Rojas, and Dean Rojas and I were head to head. Yeah, there. I can tell you, we were really hard at it with each other. Yes. Yeah. Dean was very much I gotta be careful here. I gotta remember we're on a podcast. We're not just sitting in my living room talking. Yeah, Dean and I, we had some rivalries, and we actually drew each other head to head. And boy, man, that was a freaking battle and a half on the water. We were really. Everybody knew we didn't like each other so bad. They were dying laughing when Bassmaster at Elephant Butte paired us together. So we got paired together.
And that was a tough tournament.
Elephant Butte, Bassmaster, the when they went there, yeah,
wow.
We got paired together.
Yeah, so walk us through the day.
Oh my gosh! Well, we both obviously fought for the boat. He had some sponsorship deals, so he said he had to take his boat, and I'm like, yeah, no, that's not happening, because he had something going on, and he was Mr. Superstar Dean Rojas in his world, and so he was either there was somebody filming something, or day in the life of this guy, or something like that. Whatever it was, he just was like, we're taking my boat. I go, no, we're not. We're flipping. Back then you flip for the boat and you flip for who gets the first half of the day. You flip for everything. If you don't get along, you're flipping coins like crazy. And me and Dean didn't get along, so we were flipping coins like crazy. And we did our best to backseat each other pretty well, And I remember clearly when it was his half day, which I think was the first half, because there was somebody filming and they were dying laughing because he was paralleling these banks. Like he would just get right up against the bank and parallel, and he's casting forward. And this is Elephant Butte. So there's nowhere for me to fish. I mean, there really is. There's rocks right here, and there's deep water out here, and he's going right down there. And he's paralleling, and I'm in, because we had an agreement, who, when it's your half the day, because you have that conversation, back when it was boat draw, whose boat we going to take? Flip a coin. Well, he didn't like that because he really wanted to use his boat, and because we were filming or something he was doing. And then when it's my half the day, are you in the back of the boat or are we up front together? That was another conversation you had to have. Is it gentlemanly where you're both going to fish the front both halves of the day? No, not for me and Dean. It wasn't. I was going to be in the front.
Wow.
And Dean was going to be in the front for his. Guys, I can clearly remember that. He's just casting like this, and he's basically in his little pro world himself, and he's got his little people filming, and I'm bored. So I just wait till he fires back, and I just dangle my line right over there. I just wait, and I try to hook his little hook. I mean, I'm having fun now. And the camera guys are, and he goes back like this, and I just kind of put my rod and my bait right there. He goes, and just backlashes.
Yeah, blows up his reel.
Blows his reel up, and the camera guys are laughing, and I'm like, uh-oh. And he looks back at me, and I'm like this, I mean, and it was not friendly. It was like, oh, dude, I'm so sorry. I mean, it was just like, you talk about two guys. When we were at Blast Off, Skeet and everybody, Murray and everybody were laughing because literally at Blast Off, we're both sitting there like this. And he's over there looking like this. And so there's two guys in a boat that are literally looking in opposite directions, and they both got their arms crossed, and neither one of us are talking to each other. And everybody's driving by the boat just to see the two of us paired together. That's how bad that rivalry was between me and Dean Rojas. We had it out.
Funny.
Truly, we had it out for each other. That was probably my number one nemesis in the early days.
And little did you know at the time, Byron, but he left you all the best water. You just didn't realize all those fish that were out there in open water just randomly roaming around.
If I just had a little pole with a little forward-facing sonar, right?
Exactly.
If I had some
You'd
little
have killed him.
one, and I just went out there looking around. I said, "Oh, look over there! What's that thing?" Yep.
You'd have slayed him, man.
Detector. Imagine having like a little metal detector forward-facing sonar, just a little pole that goes down, a little disc down there underwater. Yep. Oh my gosh,
that would be.
Brown Bait Company has another question. Byron, are you a fan of the Huddleston?
Yes, I love the Huddlestons. I really do. I like all the Huddleston mates. I love Ken Huddleston, and Ken taught me a lot. I loved picking. I liked all the old time guys and all the baits. I loved talking to those guys, and it was neat to have Butch Brown, talk to me and help me out with what he knew, and Huddleston educating me on what he knew. And I loved talking to the guy and Alan Cole, and and then I just loved all of it. Bruce Porter with Bass Tricks was amazing, and his group of friends, the original, and Bass Tricks are still one of my favorite baits. But I love Huddlestons, absolutely, and they're fantastic baits. They're just so good. Yeah.
What's a great bait that you loved? Maybe you still fish, but didn't make it for some reason that you still don't quite understand.
A bait that I what?
Well, especially in the world, I think of bass fishing, where guys can be so secretive. Maybe a bait that you loved, you thought, man, this is it. But like a lot of guys, you kind of keep it to yourself. You don't want everybody knowing about it, and the bait didn't catch on.
I was
but you still
California Swim Babes. You remember Art Berry's old company, the Swim Babes, yep. The Baby E and the E's. That was after the Ospreys. Ospreys were amazing, and then the Baby E, the California Swim Babies, came along, and then that company went away. And Mickey 316 is strong. I mean, he's still kicking them out. But True Tungsten went south because of what we talked about, and there were a lot of little niche things. I saw somebody ask about triple trout, and I still have. I actually have some of those. I've been debating whether I'm going to put those on my eBay site. The old triple trouts. Yeah. The triple trout.
Scott lives on Fort now.
Does he?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. He does. Yeah, he has a shop over there, and they do a swim bait thing over there. I've been tempted to go to that. They had like a big swim bait jamboree over there on Lake Fort. Yeah. But
very cool.
Yeah, there's a swim bait jamboree at Lake Fork they had. My buddy told me I should go there just because it's such a cool thing to have a whole bunch of swim bait people all get together. Fishing out.
That's Terry's best friend right there.
Scott? Really?
Yeah, we've known each other since we were 15 years old.
He was really cool, man. They're great people.
Yep.
Yeah, those companies, there's so many of them, and I think they made great baits, and I think a lot of the stuff I I was watching somebody that do something on the Mega Bass, whatever, and it sure does look like, the BV3D. A lot of them, you're like, God, that looks familiar. That looks a lot like something I won a tournament on, 10 years ago.
Yep.
You mentioned Art Berry. We're talking about kind of the one that got away, whether it's a fish that got away, a bait that didn't hit that you thought might hit. Art Berry is a name I think that comes up occasionally when people talk about a guy who might have been a great bass pro, but for whatever reason wasn't able to make it happen, didn't turn the corner, couldn't get out of his own way. Who's a guy who you thought, hey, this guy's going to be a big star, but it just didn't work out?
Well, Art was amazing. Art was so talented, and again, that's funny when we bring that up, because that's one of the guys that he could have had a long career in fishing because he was such a good fisherman. Who else can I think?
He couldn't get it done in the East, it seemed.
Yeah, it was hard.
A real talent out West kind of fell on some very hard times that folks can look up and Google. Living a bare bones kind of existence, still trying to make it. But was there somebody else who comes to mind?
Not really, not that I can think of. I mean, and that's probably just because I'm having a brain fart right now. It's not by any means of like, I'm trying to think of somebody that came and went, and you think, and I don't want to insult them because I'm not sure who might still be in the game, and say, oh yeah, whatever happened to, and then it's like, well, they're still around. They're just fishing MLF. It's like, where'd they go?
At the risk of either of you guys not being friends with this guy, but he's another California Western guy who I always enjoyed when he was on the BASS tour, the national tour. And I was sorry when he left because he was such a nice guy and he occasionally had some big successes. And that was Mike Reynolds. I always thought Mike was a very talented guy.
Robert Lee.
But the King of the Delta.
King of the Delta.
Yeah, Robert Lee.
East too, he fished back east. So yeah, but Mike Reynolds was a really good stick. That was a dear friend of John Murray's, actually. Mike was really close with John. They were close. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mike Reynolds is a good one. Yeah.
And
Dave Rush. Dave Rush was really good. I remember Dave. I don't know what he's doing anymore, but Dave Rush was.
But I don't think Rush ever went. I don't think he ever went east. But
no, he was a fisherman that you wish you'd like to have seen him gone east.
Dobbins. What the hell? I mean, it's 47 boats, and he doesn't ever go out of his zip code.
No, he won them all in that zip code. Zip code angler. 47 boats in your neck of the woods.
Makes great products, makes great fishing rods, and an amazing talent, obviously, in Gary Dobbins.
Yeah. Yes, very much so.
Dustin Grant has a question. Any good Aaron Martin stories? I'd have given anything to have met him. And I remember Falcon and Aaron getting bent out of shape because you guys both found the same batch of fish.
No. We did not find the same batch of fish. We did
okay.
Not.
My mistake.
We didn't find him. I invited him in the first day because he's a dear friend of mine, and he was a dear friend of mine. And Aaron was Aaron, and he was sitting about a quarter mile or an eighth of a mile to a quarter mile on a point far away. And I pulled up with the Carolina rig after I fished shallow all morning. And Benny Matsubu is the one that put me on the Carolina rig bite. And I pulled up to where, and it's funny because we're talking about nothing that has to do with swim baits. Carolina rigging that structure, it's called Baker. It was called Baker's Point. I guess apparently I learned that it's a bunch of foundations from an old bakery. Whatever it was, I just knew there was a bunch of junk down there. I had amazing practice in this general area where I was at. And that's where I caught that 100 and I think the belt's right over there. I think it's like 140 something pounds or 130. Do you remember what it was, Ken? Do you remember?
Well, I know that Elias wound up with
134,
42.8 or something. Was it?
It was 134.
Yeah, Elias won it.
Yeah, 132.8 is what Elias had. 132.8. It clicked finally in my tiny head.
115.
Yeah.
Yep.
And of course Scroggins was right there with you guys, and
he was second and I was third. I believe it was Paul first. And if I would have won that tournament, I would have had both records. I would have had the 4-day record, right?
But see, then you'd never do the Big Bass podcast. You'd be too big for us. We wouldn't.
I mean, right? I was third.
You wouldn't even take our calls.
I was third in that tournament, and I was 2 places away from owning the BASS all-time 3 and 4-day record, and I missed it by 2 places. And Paul Elias was within sight of me. Terry Scroggins was in the same bay, But Paul Elias was sitting on a spot where Mary Delgado from the show caught a 10-pounder where Paul sat the whole time in practice. Mary's in the back of my boat fishing with me in practice, and Mary Delgado catches a 10-pounder in the back of the boat. Her biggest bass. When she caught it, we reeled it up. I threw it in the boat, and we went over. I took a picture of her with it, far away, because we couldn't make any noise. We were practicing, but she catches a 10. Paul Elias never left that spot. That's where he set the record. I pulled up on another spot that also caught big ones, and I had 2 big bites on it. And then Aaron's down a ways, and he's not catching them. And I start wrecking them the first day. And Aaron's like, "Oh my God, they moved." I go, "What?" He goes, "My fish moved." This is typical Aaron, right? He's convinced his fish moved. I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "They're not here anymore. They came to you." I'm like, "No, how do you know they didn't go that way?" This is Aaron, right? Like he thinks that all the fish are his fish, right? He's like, "They moved." I'm like, "Well, then come on over here and catch them, man." I go, "Come on in here." So the first day I waved him in. I go, "Come on over here." And we put our boats side by side and we caught them. And so for 3 days, we literally sat side by side and caught the heck out of those fish. And then on the last day, he didn't want me to be there. And I'm like, "Dude, I invited you in there." And the last day, I'm leading the tournament. I go, "I'm going back." I go, "I'll make you a deal." I go, "I got 3 great areas." I go, "Pick which one you're going to start at." I go, "I got 3 little key areas within that area that I'll fish. Since you're leading the tournament, I'm going to let you pick which one you start on. I'm going to go to whichever one you're not at. But I'm not leaving the whole area." I mean,
Of course not.
I'm in 9th place. You're in 1st place. This isn't going to be me just leaving altogether. And that became the world famous battle that everybody watched on television that day when Aaron, came apart. And I just fished around him, but I was catching him like I was catching him. And that's where, Zona said something really poignant. He said that was the tournament that opened the door to everybody realizing that Aaron could be rattled, because we never knew we could rattle Aaron up until then. And I didn't mean to rattle him. I mean, I just was going to fish where I invited him to fish. But the last day, he literally fell apart. He went from 1st place to all the way down to whatever, 10th or 12th or 15th. He had a really poor day the last day. But he was all around big fish. They were all around it. Paul Elias was winning it. I was catching 131 pounds. They were there, but Aaron really fell apart. And Zona said that was the aha moment for the Van Dams, everybody else that looked for these guys are looking for the blood trail. They're like, "How do I beat this guy?" And that's the first time I ever got or saw Aaron get rattled was when we shared that spot together. But we were friends.
And there was a stretch there for a couple of years where he got rattled fairly often, where something would happen that would take him off his game. And what maybe a story that maybe a lot of people haven't heard is everybody knows Aaron could be quirky, but I've been out there following, a leader or something many times, and he would just start singing on the water. And he'd just start singing something like Byron Velvick, trying to catch my fish, or something like that. Just totally out of the blue.
Yeah.
And I know one time he was fishing an area really close to where the Bass Media trailer was. And I realized, oh my God, there's Aaron right out here. So I walk outside to go see him, and he never looks up at me, but I guess he can see my giant, shiny, bald head. And he starts singing, can do. But yeah, I miss that guy.
Let me tell you, I used to practice with him. So Aaron came along, he got on the tour, and he was younger than me and Murray, but we were really, really good friends. And I remember when he met Leslie, I went to the wedding. We go way, way, way back. And so Aaron and I was fishing with Aaron, and I would try to work with him, try to talk to him. And this is out west as well as back east. Wherever we were at, I could trust Aaron would tell you the truth, and I would tell him the truth. You look for those 3 or 4 guys you can confide in. The 3 or 4 guys you can really bounce stuff off of is what you're looking for. So when you're driving around, you got a bunch of social friends, you got a bunch of pseudo kind of friends, and then you have those guys that are like, I know this guy will shoot straight with me, and I'll shoot straight with him. So I pull up to Aaron, he goes, "Oh, dude, I'm catching them good." And I'm like, "What are you throwing?" He goes, "I'm throwing a worm with a little 1/32 ounce bullet weight on it, Texas style robo worm, Aaron's Magic, with a 1/32. I'm like, "Oh my gosh." He goes, "Yeah, 6-pound test, I go, "And it's got to be pegged. It's got to be pegged." I'm like, a 1/32 or a 1/64? He goes, "Yeah, you got to make them dizzy. You got to make them dizzy. It falls down, and as it's falling, it makes them dizzy, and they eat it." And I'm like, are you kidding me right now? Like, I haven't been bit all morning. And he's like, oh, no, dude, I've already caught like 12. I've already caught 12. And I can't remember which lake it was at. But this is a perfect example. So I'm like, dude, I don't have any 164th bullet weights. and I will break out a 6-pound test bait caster, or I don't know, a spool some line. Why are we throwing a bait caster on a 6-pound test? I have no idea. But he's just like, he's got his crazy little rigs, right? And so, I get and we're in the boat side by side. He goes, dude, you got to throw it. You got to throw it. Like, he's passionate, right? And I know he's shooting straight. So I'm sitting there. I tie on my 1/64th ounce, and I tie on my little. I peg it just like he says, and I throw it out there, and I'm stripping line out, trying to make the fish dizzy. I'm over there trying to make it. Like, how do we make a fish dizzy? And I go to a million places. And so, like, 4 hours later, I see him again, and I pull up, and I'm like, dude. And he goes, oh, yeah, no, they stopped eating that. They're eating a jig now. I'm like, what? And he goes, yeah, ever since I've seen you, I haven't caught any more on it. Now I'm catching them on a jig. And I'm like, my head's blowing up. Like, I'm like, how many of you caught on a jig? He goes, I caught like 8 on a jig. I go, but you told me they were eating a 164-ounce worm, And he goes, well, they were until I saw you, but they're not eating anymore. He goes, now round jig with purple. So I'm chasing Aaron's. Like, I'm trying to keep up with Aaron. I'm like, message to Byron Velvick, do not chase Aaron's bite. Like, do not ever try to keep up with Aaron Martin's. Whatever Aaron's doing, just let him do it. And Murray laughed at me about this. Murray's like, yeah, dude, biggest mistake you can ever make is trying to fish Aaron's way of fishing, because it's impossible.
Yeah, I believe that. It reminds me of a story. It was one of those all-star tournaments at the end of the season, probably around 2009, 10, 11, somewhere in there. And I'm in the boatyard talking with Aaron, and Terry Scroggins comes up, and he's wanting to know if he can get some scrounger heads from Aaron, because he thinks there might be a scrounger bite out there. And Aaron was an enormously generous man in so many ways, until it involved his fishing stuff.
Yeah.
He has to pull out one utility box, one like 3,700 box with the heads, and then he's got another 3,700 box with the lips, because they be perfect and lined up like little soldiers. And he takes like 5 minutes to stretch that silicone lip over the head just so. And then he hands it to Scroggins. And that was all Scroggins was going to get. One. And Aaron had easily the makings of 100. But he was going to get one.
Yeah, that's true. Every lure was his pet. It was like you were taking a child from him when you took a lure from him. Oh no, oh no, you can't have that one. You're like, okay.
Yeah, exactly. Because then he would say something like, well, if I give you another one, then I'll only have 98.
Right. They're losing them, bro. They're losing them, bro. I lose them on the rocks, bro. And I got 3 days of fishing. I can't give it to you. I'm not gonna give it back if you're leading it. And it's like, yeah. Aaron was wonderful, man. He was such a just a guy incapable. I think Aaron was incapable on some level of
actually
guile.
Today's Aaron Martin's Remembrance Day.
Is it really?
That's what I hear. That's what I saw on Bass Blaster or something.
Wow. I'm glad we're talking about him, man. I'm glad the podcast switched over to that, because that's pretty cool.
Yeah, Aaron was wonderful. Just one of my favorite people I ever got to know, and just dining with Aaron was quite an experience.
People thought we hated each other after Falcon. I mean, they really made that out to be. We were at odds for a while, but people, man, that because it aired on television and then it was on YouTube and people could watch it, man, that was really that because of it was televised, it made it so much worse than what it was. And it was just it was too bad Falcon was that much of a deal between, and everyone was like, oh, Aaron Martin's, I thought that would be a rival. It's like, that's no rival. I've had a long standing friendship with him, way beyond any fishing tournament. I know he got upset because he has such a, that was, Aaron getting into a tournament where he thought that he should, he would love to have won it, but it just didn't work out.
Yeah. Well, I knew you guys were close even through that. Yeah, Aaron could get distracted. I'm not even going to say angry per se, because I don't know that Aaron was truly angry at you so much as he was maybe frustrated by being distracted by you.
Yeah.
And I watched Aaron get distracted many a time when somebody would come out and just try to mess with him, and say, well, if you're not using 5-pound test, you're not going to get bit. Well, that would send him into rethinking his entire game plan.
What about him opening up his terminal tackle box or opening up his worm box and seeing 2 worms that were a little bit bent, and he'd empty the box in the middle of the tournament on his deck and completely rearrange the box.
Yep.
So everything was perfect.
He did that. I went to his house a bunch of times, and that guy lived out ad nauseum. Leslie and I would be upstairs. We'd all be doing stuff, and he would sit down in his garage and just do stuff. Not even a tournament coming up. Nothing even happening. Just be down in his garage working on tackle. And it was crazy to be around his house because we were all doing other stuff and playing all this stuff. And Aaron and Leslie, I would even laugh about it. I'm like, this guy, it's not like we have a major event coming up, but he is down there redoing his whole whatever bait box you might be thinking, whatever, and he just spill them all out. And it would be like, I can't put that much love and energy into this, man. It's crazy. I'm freaking out. And then you got the opposite. Like I remember Robert Lee, for instance, he would just grab a whole pile of spinnerbaits and shake it. Whichever one fell out on the deck is the one he'd throw. Like he would just have a bucket of spinnerbaits, and it'd be like a hodgepodge. And someone would have the old rubber things that were melted, the old skirts, and he's shaking it. And he goes, oh yeah, they'll eat that one. I mean, Aaron would have lost his damn mind looking at Robert Lee just shaking a whole pile of spinnerbaits to try to get one loose. Imagine that.
I've told this story before on other shows. After Aaron finished second in the 2004 Classic to Takahiro, I'm standing with him at his boat, and the deck is just littered with what I think were Zoom flukes. And he had been throwing them on something like a fish head spin, some sort of horsey head type bait. And I looked at him and I noticed that every one of these flukes that was torn up and thrown on the deck of the boat had a black eye on each side he had drawn in with a Sharpie, and they had a red gill plate that he had drawn in with a Sharpie, and they had a smiley face. And I said, okay, and you guys know you can't do that in advance. You have to do that right before you throw them, because otherwise they just bleed all over each other. Nothing happens.
Right.
So he's doing that right before he throws. And Aaron, it's going to take him at least a minute to do one.
Right.
So he's a losing cat. But anyway, so I'm saying, okay, Aaron, this is right after he's just lost the Classic by a small margin. And I said, okay, Aaron, I get the eyes. A lot of guys do that. I get the gill plate. Makes sense on some level. But what's with the smiley face? And he said, Ken, I thought they wanted a happy bait. and everybody right here knows he was deadly serious.
Dead serious. Yep. When I told you he wanted to make the fish dizzy, he literally told me the fish had to be dizzy for that one. That worm had to fall and be twisting in the water, so it made the fish dizzy, and they wanted a dizzy worm. They wanted a happy bait, and they wanted a dizzy worm, and that's crazy. But it was dead serious. Like there's no joking about this. This is what you must do. And I learned a long time ago, don't fish Aaron's fish. Don't talk to Aaron, because whatever he's doing, you can't even do it if you wanted to.
Such sound advice.
It was good advice.
It took me a year or two to learn how to interview Aaron.
Uh-huh.
If I asked him a question, he would get to the answer. He might first have to tell me how he lost his cell phone or how something else happened, but he would come around to the answer.
Or why turkey's so good in your spaghetti, and are you running every day? And I only eat turkey with spaghetti. Don't eat red meat, Ken. Okay, you don't want the red meat in a spaghetti. Leslie makes the best turkey sausage spaghetti you could ever have. And you're like, oh my gosh! And then the weight metabolism and hiking the Adirondacks and whatever it is until you get to what you need. Yep.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And you were talking a little bit earlier about how he would sometimes let his total dedication and devotion and passion for the attention get in his way. In the 2005 Classic, where he also finished second to Van Dam, he lost a couple of fish. He broke off a fish or two. That water was very turbid. There was no more than 9 or 10 inches of visibility in those rivers. And Aaron's throwing 5-pound test line. And I'm wondering, why on earth are you using 5-pound line when there's no way that line visibility could be a factor here?
That was Pittsburgh, right?
Yeah, that was Pittsburgh. Sorry, yeah, the Three Rivers area of Pittsburgh.
Yep.
5-pound test line in water that was really dirty. Most of
Yep.
it 6 to 8 inches of visibility.
Yep. Yeah, I remember that. We Bass Center. We were there. That was one of our Bass Center studio setups, and I remember that water clarity. And we were having the same conversation about why would you use that light of line around those bridges with that kind of dirty water? Like, what's the point of that? You're not going to question him. I mean, he got second, but he should have easily won that with a 8-pound test or whatever he could have used.
Yeah, because he lost that one key fish.
Yeah, the one where he falls to the deck holding his head. Yeah, the man could have won that classic. But what a great competitor!
Something happened to your
being.
Something happened. Your sound, Ken, is messed up.
Yeah, your sound went away a little bit, Ken.
I'll be quiet.
No, you're good. I just say it's quite. You got.
See if your plug is plugged in.
Okay. Yeah, everything's plugged in. Can you hear me?
That's weird.
I think I'm down to 18%, so I better plug this thing in.
Oh, well, heck, we've had you for 2.5 hours.
Has it been 2.5 hours? No way.
Yeah. The time
for
flies when you're having fun.
Oh my gosh, this is great.
Yeah.
It's why you need a podcast. You're so good at this, Byron. You're so good.
I'm not good at this. You guys are good at this. You guys are leading this thing. I'm looking at I'm like, you're right. It is 2.5 hours.
All right, so we got one more question from Country Nerd 24. Mr. Byron, do you think O.H. Ivy will produce the Texas state record next year? The 16.5 caught a couple weeks ago was insane for a fall bass.
Man, that's yeah, that's one lake where there's some giants in there. God, there's some big fish in there, and that is insane. A 16.5 for the fall. They stopped taking sharelunkers because it's just become such a bass factory out there. And I fish that lake quite a bit. I think this spring it probably will. There's probably going to be a behemoth. To his answer, yes. I think OHIV probably will produce it. It's covered up with boats. It's a frustrating lake to fish because it's so heavily hit. But there are just some monsters in there. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It's a tough lake to fish. It's frustrating to go there because it's so packed all the time for obvious reasons. It's not big. It's not a very big lake at all. And but I think it will produce I think it should produce the Texas record. What is the Texas state record now? It was a Lake Fork.
18.18.
18. That was Lake Fork on a crappie jig, right?
Yep.
On a bridge. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was like 92.
Long time. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it will. I think that lake in particular, it's sad what's happened to Amistad. Who knows what's happened to that lake? It's awful. I talked to Danny Brower the other day, and he's like, we sure picked the wrong lake, didn't we? Like, oh my God. So sad.
Well, you could have picked Falcon and done the same thing, right? I mean,
yeah. Falcon too, but it was just such a pretty lake. Amistad was so pristine. It was just it wasn't like Dirty Falcon, It didn't have the drug cartels, and you weren't living near Laredo and all that other stuff. You were at a really pretty lake that had just beautiful everything. And it's just sad. Yeah. But I think Ivy will probably produce it. It's just for a 16.5 in the fall. If that's the case, that fish will be a monster, in January, February.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, man, let's I guess we'll end it and
wrap it up.
Thanks
Good.
a ton for coming and spending a couple hours with us talking about the old days. Some big fish and all that stuff.
Thank you for having me, guys. I really appreciate the second round of this. That was great.
Oh, well, we'll do a third
thank you,
round
Byron.
too. So,
no, thank you. Let's do one of the Byron bunkers up and running, and I can sit and talk. I'll have all these little things I'm selling, and you guys can be wearing your Bass Center hats that I send you.
Yeah. We could do it like the Home Shopping Network or something.
Yes, we'll do the Home Shopping Network. I'll do it from my eBay room. And I'll say, tonight we have this on sale. Tonight, Terry, what do you want? He goes, I want a triple trout, or I want, an old Rago, or something. A wood Rago, all that stuff.
That'd be
any
awesome.
way we can help you move that stuff, we're in.
Hey, well, I want to get you guys, after we're done, text me the address where to send the Bass Center hats. You want loudmouth bass too, or just Bass Center?
Both of them.
Well, I'll
Both
send,
would be great.
when you got next time you see, I will definitely have Zona sign a loudmouth bass one because that would be something to have as well. Loudmouth, he'll die when you walk up and say, "Hey, sign this for me, Mark." I mean, where the hell did you get that, Terry? Where the hell did you get that, Ken? You're like, your old buddy Byron out west.
We'll take him to the Classic and get Zona and Kumar to sign.
Is Kumar still around? Is he still?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, he's got a newsletter called Bass Blaster that comes out a couple times a week.
Oh, good. So he's walking around, huh? He's still doing the shows and all that?
He's still doing a lot of bass coverage, and he's still chasing Sasquatch.
Okay. Oh, my God.
Geez.
It's been great. Thank you so much for having me on.
Well,
Byron, thank you. I don't know if my sound is good now, but thank you so much.
Now. Yeah.
Get right back up.
You know, I realized that when you're talking about any pro angler, especially somebody who's been as much in the limelight as you have, Byron, through your other TV appearances and so forth, people form an idea of who that guy is or whatever. But I'll tell you what, this conversation with Byron has been very much like it would be if we were talking at a tackle show or hanging around and having dinner on the tournament trail. This guy is just this genuine, just this warm and engaging. If you weren't a Byron Velvick fan before this conversation started, I got to believe you are now, or because he's great.
I appreciate that. And thank you guys so much, Terry, Ken. You guys are great friends, and I when you guys asked me to do these podcasts, I couldn't be more excited to do it, and I was thrilled to do the first one, and this was even better. So thank you guys for having me. I really mean it. Man. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man. Appreciate you, and don't be a stranger. We'll have it. Yeah. And you should have your own show. You should have your own show.
Don't tempt me.
You have
you need your daughter to help you.
Fast. Yeah. Well, maybe someday. Right now, I'll just be busy. I barely made this one. She had volleyball practice, and I was like, "Oh my God!" Talking to Nathan, I'm like, that popped up between the time we scheduled it. Now I'm like, she's got this club volleyball stuff. You're like, "Oh my God, I'm not going to have a free weekend again for a long, long time." That's these crazy commitments, these club things to go 8 months of like tournament twice a week or practice twice a week in tournaments. And I was panicking about making this show, and getting back here in time to do it. So it's a lot. I might get to a podcast someday, but I appreciate you guys having me on this one.
You'd be terrific. You'd build an audience fast, and I believe you'd enjoy it.
Oh yeah, I enjoy this a lot. So thanks for walking down memory lane with me, you guys. Thanks so much.
No worries.
Our pleasure.
Always a good time.
Byron Velvick, everybody.
Yay.
Thanks, man. Terrific.
Let the dogs out.
Let the dogs out.
Let the dogs out.
There you go. All right, folks, that's going to do it for this episode of the Big Bass Podcast. We hope you had, if you had half as good a time as Terry and I did, then you had a blast with Byron Velvick. He's the best. I'm going to slam the door on this one. Thanks for joining us again. We know your time is valuable, so we really appreciate your spending some of it with us. If you enjoyed the show, hit the like and subscribe buttons. And if you really liked it, please tell a friend about it. It would help us a lot. If you're a Big Bass junkie, check out our website at thebigBassPodcast.com. You'll have our Big Bass Podcast calculator that Dr. Battisti prepared. It's good for fish over 14.5 pounds, like Byron Velvick catches and some of the guys fishing OH Ivy. We also have a list of state record largemouth, smallmouth, and spotted bass. If you'd like to connect with us, you can reach us via email, Ken at thebigBassPodcast.com, Terry at thebigBassPodcast.com, and Nathan at thebigBassPodcast.com. Please join us again next time, and we'll bring you another story about another big fish that you cannot find anywhere else. And Terry, what do they need to remember?
Size matters.
Size matters.
Bye, y'all.
See you guys.
See ya. Now,